Well, all this buildup for weeks, it feels like months for Bobby Lashley's debut in AEW, and nobody from New York or Los Angeles is watching with a competitive, suddenly competitive World Series and a ultra competitive game 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, game 6, game 5. 5, yeah. So yeah, kind of a bummer in that sense. I think this will be one of the lower rated Dynamites ever. But there are some people who don't care about baseball. Certainly, people in the middle of the country, or who aren't into New York and LA. There might even be a few New York and LA people who don't care about baseball, but it is a pretty big World Series. So let's talk about what a lot of people might not have seen, which is the debut of Bobby Lashley. They headlined with Swerve Strickland and Shelton Benjamin. They actually portrayed Shelton as the dominant of the two that really played up the storyline that Shelton was dominating and Swerve was on the defense most of the time. Swerve then got a win. MVP got on the phone. The lights went out incorrectly because the ring lights weren't supposed to go out. They came right back on. It was like someone went, oops. And then they turned off the house lights but left the ring lights on. And Bobby Lashley posed and made his way out. Tony Schiavone said he's never been on TBS before, so now he's seen everything. I think there's a few other wrestlers who haven't been on TBS. But yeah, so then they beat down Swerve, and Nana took a boot to the face. Security, of course, took a beating. Brandon, what'd you think of this as the way to introduce Bobby Lashley into the mix?
I thought the meat of the segment was strong. I mean, I like the introduction of Lashley here. I think that the way MVP sort of framed the Hurt Business as returning was a strong way to go off the air. A few little issues production wise that I think kind of held the segment back a bit, between the one you already mentioned, the lights cutting out at the wrong time, and then I didn't think that that MVP putting the call in to Lashley made a whole lot of sense. When that happened, I was like, oh, okay, so they're setting up Lashley to debut next week or sometime in the future, and instead it happens like seconds after. So are we to assume then, unless we find out later on that MVP actually was not calling Lashley and was in fact calling someone else, are we to assume that Lashley was just sitting in the back in the car waiting for his cue? Or,
Yeah.
If he was, why wasn't he watching the show? Why wouldn't he already know to come out after Shelton loses? It just didn't work particularly well in that regard. And then they had a little issue as far as miking the referees around the ring, because you very clearly heard 90 seconds till off air, 60 seconds till off air, 30 seconds till off air, and hit the pose. So just a few little quirks there that little issues. I think you would call it, like straightening your tie. Just a little thing that got away from them. But the meat of the debut, I thought, was strong.
Yeah, Derek Mitchell in the chat goes, I like the countdown at the end of the show, which was so audible. You can hear someone saying 90 seconds, guys, 45, 15. I think they should do that for matches. Just let us know 90 seconds ahead when the finish is coming. Who was doing it? Was it Wade Barrett? I think Wade Barrett said on SmackDown on Friday, but I think it was Barrett who said, "Oh, we're nearing the end of the match," or something like somebody this last week. I think more than it's happened more than once. I don't know if it's always the same guy, but I think it was Barrett who goes, "Well, we're late in the match," and it's like, how do you know you're late in the match? We might be a third of the way into it. You don't know. Well, I mean, you know that, but you're not supposed to know. You don't. We don't. The format sheet is not part of canon. So yeah, no, the phone thing, even Darby dropping down earlier in the show. I mean, there's these weird things that AEW does that don't kind of go through the there's metal detectors to make sure you don't have weapons. There should be an IQ detector for angles to make sure that they don't not make sense. There needs to be somebody who just goes, yeah, what are viewers supposed to think? And why does MVP need to call Lashley? You can obviously have a plan. I mean, I guess in theory it's Lashley was hanging out backstage. I'm going to do my best here. If Shelton won, they were going to go party together, and Lashley wasn't going to show up, or maybe he'd come out and celebrate if Shelton won. And MVP's like, shoot, Shelton didn't win. but maybe we ought to teach Swerve a lesson. So why don't you come out anyway? I mean, I guess we can do some mental gymnastics and explain it. Darby being dangling up, in the rafters, being ready to be lowered down just in case. You also do have to do some mental gymnastics for that.
And it took them a while to get down too. I mean, there was a beat down there for a while. Like they almost broke Orange Cassidy's neck, and then
yeah, maybe he was in Washington State and he saw bad things were happening, and he's like, I better get there. And then somehow he got confused, took a wrong turn. He's in the catwalk, and he's like, well, just tie me up and lower me. I mean, sometimes yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe we're looking at this the wrong way, and Darby was, as you said, in Washington State, needed to get there, and Bobby Lashley teleported. So the call was legitimate. Bobby Lashley was sitting at home, and MVP made the call.
Apparently, there are Darby memes. I'm too busy typing up the report, so let us know what they are. So yeah, I mean, is it nitpicking? I mean, of course, but do nitpicks add up and to a product that seems unpolished and kind of low IQ or sloppy, or there's one contrivance too many? I don't know how many are allowed and how blatant they are, but everybody has a different a tolerance for contrivances and things that don't make sense. I don't want to. It's not the fix, so maybe I shouldn't pick on him until then. But Alex Marvez's acting, to me, is like the worst thing on the show. He still hasn't. Has he ever watched himself back? And has anyone just said, Alex, just like we're not doing a show for 8-year-olds. Like, let's dial down the acting just a little bit. So yeah, I mean, whatever. There's things to pick on with any wrestling show, but the goal of a wrestling company should be to clean that stuff up. And there was, lot to mop up and clean up. Some of it just is the way that they approach things. Like, I mean, we're getting into broader critiques, but I don't think we should have two baby faces cutting essentially the same promo about representing the locker room and protecting the locker room. Orange Cassidy, we'll get into it, cut a promo at the top of the show. We'll review that in the next segment. And then Adam, it's against John Moxley and you don't represent the locker room. And then Adam Cole comes out and goes, MJF, you aren't respecting the locker room, and I'm going to protect what AEW stands for. Like in back-to-back segments. I mean, you got to just decide who's going to be the one who cuts that type of promo, and we can't have them on the same week. It takes a little bit away from that. Derek Hubbard in the chat says, I am forgiving for artistic license in wrestling, and I am in certain instances too. But I'm less forgiving when it is an overplayed cliche instead of something original. Anyway, we'll get into more chat room stuff later. So I'm getting sidetracked. Normally I try to stay a little focused in block A here before introductions. Brandon, I want to talk about Bobby Lashley's value to AEW. That's more important really than anything we've said. Not that you only have to talk about the most important stuff. That's a straighten your tie phrase I used. It's okay to talk about stuff that isn't in the top 5 of things they need to fix or that happened on a show. I think that's important. There's a lot of good editors, a lot of good articles that have been written for magazines, and they were good before the editor got to them, but it was good the editor got to them because, you don't want typos and grammar mistakes or, whatever, misplaced, whatever. My analogy goes back to writing sometimes. The biggest issue here in the last segment is Bobby Lashley's now on the roster, and there's multiple ways to look at it. MVP and Shelton and Lashley didn't really get rolling in the way that I think a lot of people wanted them to in WWE. It came out there was, certainly some conflict between MVP and Lashley and Paul Levesque and management in WWE. Now they're in a new place. It's a wrestler. It's in theory and in execution most of the time a wrestler-friendly place, for better or for worse, you could argue. So they're going to have a little more creative freedom to do what they want. They're working with Swerve, who I think is going to want to work well with them and make this a major angle for AEW. But it is Bobby Lashley. He was a star in Impact Wrestling for a while. He's been in and out of WWE. He's never been a true top guy. And on his own, I think there's absolute value. He looks like a star. He can wrestle. He's still a great athlete. He can still wrestle. He's a good fit, I think, with Shelton and MVP in a lot of ways. But he is the latest in a long line of WWE cast-offs. And I was talking, earlier this week, I think it was on Everything with Rich and Wade, the VIP show, that AEW has, as WWE announces their independent wrestler initiative to sponsor indie wrestlers and support them. We think about where AEW had this early influx of all these stars, from California and New Japan, California indie scene, New Japan, Mexico, and they brought in ROH wrestlers who were but they haven't done a lot of that since. There's like Danny Garcia, there's a few women wrestlers, but it's not like they have had this second and third influx of the top indie talent. They've just kind of stuck with a similar roster, and you've still got Mike Bennett and Chuck Taylor, and just people who sort of hung around for a long time but aren't difference makers, and they haven't replenished. WWE is now trying to do that. Bobby Lashley fits the pattern. He might be one of the better options, but he fits the pattern of, if anybody gets cut from WWE, there's a 90% chance we're going to sign him, which is what TNA did for years too, when NWA TNA first launched. So I like Lashley on this roster. I think there's value in him being here. It's not like instantly a net negative, but it is part of a pattern that I don't think is the initial spirit of what AEW was going to be also. So I think there's some mixed thoughts, not just from me, but from a lot of people on this. So Brandon, I throw to you for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know that it necessarily helps that the presentation is so similar out of the gate either. You're looking at, he comes out with the similar lights out entrance, and they do the sort of the drum line that he had in WWE. It was a very specific callback to that. They wanted you to know based on the music that it was Bobby Lashley. So there's certainly elements to the WWE character already sort of creeping in. And I don't know, that it's necessarily a terrible thing. Like the character was successful in WWE, and I think that Lashley is a name enough in and of itself that he doesn't need to be repackaged or reinvented to be introduced in a new company. I think you're right in the sense that it isn't necessarily in the spirit of the way that things started for AEW, but their priorities have shifted over the last couple of years. I think we've seen that. And I think he's overall a strong addition to the roster. I don't view him as being a guy that is going to spend much time at the top of the card. I think given his age, number one, and two, just the number of talent they have at that position right now, waiting for opportunities at the top, it's not likely to me that he winds up in that spot. But the one thing that I will say that is not necessarily a negative, but something that I think they're going to have to be mindful of going forward is the sheer number of heel factions that they have on the roster right now, and how they're all sort of at odds, but have to be kept away from each other for appearances. So you have Moxley's faction at the top, you have the Elite, which, based on what we saw tonight, may or may not be turning soon. And I have my reservations about that. You have the family with Christian Cage and company. You have the Learning Tree. So there's all these groups that are vying for space on a 2-hour Dynamite show. And the Hurt Business is just another one to add to that. You're muted.
I think there are arguments to be made that have as many factions as are over and useful. I don't think there should be a hard and fast rule, but I think you should think hard about if there are factions that, if you have so many factions, that the idea of a faction just feels less novel. Could you have a wrestling company that's just almost everybody is in a faction? You could, but there's something about the way factions are booked versus an individual wrestler, or a wrestler with a manager, or a tag team, or even like just some buddies hanging around. When it's a heel faction, there's a way that you book it and present it, and it does water it down a little bit. If I'm part of a faction in a wrestling company, I don't know that I want there to be 4 or 5 other heel factions at the same time. It takes away some of the novelty of people being in a group. Let's pause, because there's a lot of chat room comments. I don't want to go further into our conversation before letting them lead the way a little bit more, different points of view on Bobby Lashley and some of the other stuff we talked about in the opening segment. So let's briefly pause, introduce ourselves, and then get back to the conversation. This is the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling post show for Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. I'm Wade Keller, host of the show, the editor, publisher, and founder of the Pro Wrestling Torch weekly newsletter and the website PWTorch.com. I also host a variety of podcasts each week, including the Blue Logo Show, the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling Podcast. Stephanie Chase joined me yesterday, and we talked about the overlap of politics and pro wrestling at a level that I don't recall ever happening to this degree. Yes, Jesse Ventura was governor. Hulk Hogan teased and Rock teased at times they might run for president, publicity stunt or, whatever those things were. There was the Smackdown Your Vote campaign, whatever, 25, 30 years ago. Linda McMahon running for Senate, all that. I mean, it's not like it hasn't happened, but having different wrestlers come out endorsing different candidates, Undertaker interviewing Trump, Mick Foley on cable news networks, endorsing Kamala Harris, Hulk Hogan at the Republican National Convention, and at a speech, and turning into kind of a punchline on late night talk shows because he had trouble tearing off his T-shirt, which was only topped by Donald Trump today having trouble opening the door to a truck while almost falling over, which is gaining quite a bit of traction. Not a good look. Biden fell off a bike too. I mean, it happens. They're older. But he was on a bike until he fell. But anyway, it has been quite a couple weeks and really a few months of politics and wrestling. And Stephanie and I talked about, is this uncomfortable for fans? Is it divisive? Is it absolutely the right of everybody? Just like Arnold Schwarzenegger coming out and endorsing Kamala Harris, Bad Bunny endorsing Kamala Harris. There's celebrities who are going to speak up, and they should be able to. It's up to people to decide how important celebrity endorsements are. Sometimes it's good to listen to what they have to say, and not just who they are to decide if it matters. So a lot of that is going on too. So we spent a good portion of the flagship talking about that, which is fun for a change. But I'm also looking forward to hopefully an election result a week or so from now that everybody agrees was free and fair, as the last one was, and we can move on. But nevertheless, search Wade Keller in your podcast app if that appeals to you, or jump ahead about an hour if you want to hear our non-pro wrestling and politic overlap discussion. That is our Blue Logo Show. It has a weekly flagship. It has pay-per-view previews. It has interviews. It has flashbacks. When you search Wade Keller, you'll see the red and blue logo. This is our Red Logo Show, the Wade Keller post shows, which are live streamed on our YouTube channel Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights after Raw, Dynamite, and SmackDown. And then it appears on our podcast feed along with other features. To get all of our shows, you should, if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll want to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on some of our other content that is on those feeds. So search Wade Keller and subscribe to both the Red Logo Show and the Blue Logo Show. But we are here to talk AEW Dynamite, and PWTorch contributor Brandon LeClair is joining me as co-host tonight. Brandon, welcome. Good to have you on the show again.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So you are, the intent is on the schedule for you to host the WWE Crown Jewel post show on the PWTorch Daily Cast feed, Wrestling Night in America. So people who want to listen to that after the fact, they can download it by searching PWTorch in their podcast app on, if they haven't yet, do it anytime between now and Saturday, and hit refresh, and the post show will show up. We'll also be live on YouTube with that post show. Brandon, you'll be hosting with a co-host yet to be determined or yet to be announced. And that'll start pretty shortly after Crown Jewel ends. So you'll also be contributing your written report alongside mine at pwtorch.com. Welcome. Good to see you again. And anything else you want to say to introduce yourself?
No, you covered it.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So one other piece of business, just if you want to participate in the show, multiple ways to do it. wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com is the email address. You can, even if you're not watching our show live on YouTube, that's the way you can be part of the show. Let your voice be heard. Send in a topic suggestion, a question, rant, compliment, rave, whatever you want to do. And we check the mailbag. We try to get to as many of the emails as we can every time that we do these post shows. You can also join in the chat room if you're watching us live on YouTube, youtube.com/PWTorch. We also link to the YouTube stream in my TV reports at pwtorch.com and pwtorchvip.com. And then finally, you can be a video caller. We welcome your participation. If you're a VIP member or a Patreon supporter, you can find the exclusive link to be a video caller there, and we'll bring you onto the show to be part of the conversation. All right. think that's the main stuff. So let's move forward here with our discussion. And as I said, we'll go back to the chat room for some of the feedback on our initial discussion. Shea Penn says WWE will take AEW talent when they are available as well. I don't think it's a problem. If a guy like Bobby's available, you take him. He looks incredible. The whole stable looks incredible. And that's what I tried to, build into my question is I'm not against signing Bobby Lashley in and of itself. I think it just, Brandon, is part of a pattern where the money and the TV time and the big presentation of, hey, look at this, is going to just about anybody who gets discarded from WWE of kind of any name value. And a lot of companies have done that over the years, and it can be exciting when it happens. If you're an underdog and you sign people, it was exciting, when WCW before the Monday Night War signed Jake the Snake Roberts and brought him in, and I don't know. I mean, we could go through a whole array of wrestlers who were WWF stars, and when they showed up in WCW, it was like, wow, this is great. When WWF was behind in the Monday Night War and they signed Mark Marrow, that was a big deal. He was a WCW guy. Well, sort of a big deal. I mean, they tried to give him a big push. Brian Pillman didn't go great, but that was intended to be a big deal. Obviously, the launch of Nitro with Lex Luger showing up, that's all. And then TNA, NWA TNA, when they first launched, that was a big thing. These, stars that well, we're going to bring them in, and it's going to be a big deal. And it's something that Impact has done, TNA has done in more recent years. Chris Lansdale points out, remember the what's so-and-so doing in the Impact Zone memes? It feels like we're so close to an AW1. And so far, it has succeeded twice, arguably. So what do you say to Shea saying, hey, WWE would sign an AW cast off, WWE, AW is going to do the same thing? Is it a case-by-case thing? Is there a situation where you would say, we're doing too much of that, we're spending too much time doing that, and it looks like we'll just take anyone who WWE decides they don't want anymore, if that's a perception, and it can hurt the brand that AEW had initially, which is, look, it's Cody who made a name for himself after he left WWE, and yet he's proven himself outside of WWE. Kenny Omega, never been there, New Japan star, best in the world. So anyway, they brought in Jericho and Moxley too, and Shawn Spears. There were people who were part of WWE and NXT who were brought in initially too, but AEW's brand so much was about the new blood. And I say this in the context of, we did get Private Party winning the tag titles, and they're kind of an AEW original. We had Jack Perry and Danny Garcia in an angle, Hangman Page getting a promo, Orange Cassidy setting himself up for world title shot. It is not like this is a company just of WWE cast-offs. And I'm in, fairness to them, this is not a company overrun with them. But does Shea make a point, or do you still pause to think, is this worth continuing this if you're AEW, if another opportunity comes for somebody a little bit below Lashley's stature?
I don't necessarily have an issue with either company signing the other's talent. We, like you kind of mentioned earlier on, it was commonplace in the WWE versus WCW days. It's going to happen. I don't think inherently there's any issue, and I don't think that you need to draw any sort of hard line and say, like, well, we've signed 10 of these guys, so we can't sign 11. I don't think that is a problem. I think that the thing that with AEW that you want to be particularly mindful of is just the size of the roster. And that is regardless of whether the person that you're looking into is coming from WWE or elsewhere. They have a massive roster, and a lot of the time they're not using that talent. And you could argue that some of those guys are on Rampage and are on Collision, but by and large, yes, those shows are canon to the AEW product, but they're ignored by a pretty decent part of the fan base. Dynamite is really AEW proper. And so if you're not getting featured on Dynamite, you're not really part of the week-to-week stories. You might get an angle that is built primarily on Rampage or Collision that winds up on a pay-per-view, but typically it's one of the lesser matches on a crowded card. So I would just say, I don't care where the talent is coming from, where they've been in the past. I just think that you want to be mindful of the sheer volume of guys and girls that you're bringing in because of the size of the roster and the way in which a lot of your talent has been lost in the shuffle.
Derek Mitchell says, I don't mind Lashley and Benjamin signing with AEW, but as a company, I don't think you want to be known as a retirement home instead of developing younger, newer stars. And I think there is some scar tissue Brandon, with Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff and Booker T and Kevin Nash and what happened in TNA when AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, like the Samoa Joe, the people who the fans were really getting behind. And frankly, Hogan and Booker and Nash, they didn't improve things dramatically. They gave them some cachet and value for people who weren't watching the week-to-week product. But, Steve Austin was not a household name until he became one when he was given the spotlight and the push as a top star. Hall and Nash became much bigger stars in WCW because of circumstances. There are just, a multitude of examples of companies growing when something new happens. I think every generation, and frankly, every type of fan who's disgruntled with one brand and wants their own brand, they want to have their own guys. And that's, I guess, kind of part of what I'm starting a conversation on. This isn't an outrage either way for me if they turned it down or if they turn someone down or bring someone in. I think it's just a conversation to have, which is if, the retirement community reputation could be there. And I think some fans do have scar tissue. But again, I think if you look at tonight's Dynamite, I said it already, but I'll say it again. Danny Garcia, Jack Perry, Orange Cassidy. Swerve Strickland is a WWE cast-off, but he wasn't a main roster pushed guy. He was someone, and I think it's better to do this, sign someone who's underutilized, who shows and proves that they were underutilized. I think AEW fans will embrace that more. So, I mean, it's been kind of lingering as a conversation piece before Lashley showed up. And the key is, and I think one of the criticisms people have, I don't know, maybe waving a caution flag is a better way to put it, is why is Shelton Benjamin doing so well against AEW top people? If he was, and Todd Martin talked about this on The Fix last week, if he was not a featured top star with a winning record against top people. It's been decades since there was hope that he would be that. And so some of it is if you bring them in and they start looking better than your top stars. I mean, that was a big thing when Jim Crockett Promotions bought Bill Watts' UWF Mid-South promotion. Dusty Rhodes just buried everybody from the UWF. And the UWF World title was an opening match on a pay-per-view. Doc Williams wasn't treated like a big deal. I mean, there was just, it just decimated the credibility when they could have had that. And then people say that about the invasion angle with WWF and WCW. I've been pretty steadfast in thinking it was overrated with what they had to work with, considering how many people were being paid to sit at home by AOL Time Warner. It was pretty overrated what they could have done, and they had a good thing going otherwise and would have been disruptive, but that's a debate I've had many times in the past. I don't think it's as much of a lost opportunity in reality as it is in people's heads. But you want to create a situation where you have a mix, but you want to have your own identity, and you don't want AEW's identity, because the opportunity is there to sign these people, that it is something other than its own brand, rather than whatever cast-offs there are from WWE. And so, just throw that out there.
I think there's a standard of quality too that AEW is upholding, that you could argue that a company like TNA did not when they were doing similar things. Like, Hulk Hogan, Scott Steiner were not able to wrestle TNA's full-time talent the way that Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin can wrestle AEW's top full-time talent. So I think that's an important designation too, where Lashley and Benjamin can still, undoubtedly go and can look the part against AEW's top guys, whereas some of those major, bygone era stars that were signing with TNA, for example, back then, were essentially forcing guys like AJ Styles, like Kurt Angle at the time, Samoa Joe, to work down to their current ability.
Yes. The Lady B pushed back on the retirement home framing. Do they send you to retirement home in your 50s? Well, they can. I mean, it's like, there are 55 plus communities, but obviously as a professional athlete, if you're in your 50s, Jericho, for instance, Jeff Jarrett, you are late in your career. There's very few wrestlers who are wrestling as pushed featured talent in their 50s, and usually it's on the very end of their run. But yeah, the retirement home is not, it's metaphorical for you're in your latter years, for whatever the context is, life or as a pro wrestler. A lot of chat
And
room
being in
activity.
your 40s in pro wrestling now is a lot different than being in your 40s in pro wrestling in like the 90s too.
Yeah. Yep. There was there it was. Somebody, the chat room's so wide open. Remember, super chats are a good way to get noticed. I know we've got one we'll get to. Derek Mitchell is the post that I'm looking for here. AW has at least 6 active wrestlers in their 50s or almost 50. Jeff Jarrett at 57, Jericho at 53, Edge at 51, not active at the moment, Christian at 50, Lashley at 50, and then Shelton Benjamin at 49 going on 50. So, it's just something to be aware of. Keith Birdie says, or Bridie says, in defense of Tony Khan, I think with no developmental, he sometimes just has to hire people that are TV ready instead of indie guys. And that gets to why I brought it up on with Rich Fan on the VIP show, Everything with Rich and Wade yesterday. Is it Tony Khan? Should Tony Khan have been more active in creating some sort of developmental system that WWE is now doing with their budget and the scale that they can, where it's not just Danny Garcia and Nick Wayne, I'm trying to think of who else on the men's roster, got added and has been pushed since the pillars were established and all of that. Someone who's really stuck and gotten pushed in TV time and mic time. Should he have been doing more, or did he go, hey, I got all the top guys that I wanted when we first launched, and now I'm loyal. And then the availability of some ex-WWE guys, whether it's Adam Copeland or CM Punk, or heck, going back to Aleister Black, Malachi Black and Rusev. It's just been a lot of budget, a lot of bandwidth has been taken up with them, as opposed to here's a fast rising star that we believe in who is ready. But the counter to that is Zach Barber saying WWE was literally the only prominent wrestling company for 20 years. It's nearly impossible to find someone who hasn't worked in WWE at some point. But I think the counter to that is Tony Khan should have been finding some people, maybe with his budget and to differentiate himself, finding more people who were ready to get pushed so that it wouldn't come across like the only way to refresh the roster is to bring in, ex-WWE guys when they become available. Brandon, any more on that?
I think it's important to differentiate the kinds of talent that AEW has brought in over the years from WWE as well. There are classes in the sense that, you have the likes of Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, guys who were brought in and seen as underutilized, underdeveloped in WWE, and they were brought in with the hopes that you would get to see more out of them in AEW. And it's been a mixed bag. Some have worked out really well. Others we've learned that, maybe their ceiling was what we saw in WWE. Others the jury is still out on. And then there's the crop of talent who are in AEW for various other reasons. And I know that, Lashley was disgruntled with the way that he went out in WWE. But realistically, I don't think anyone is looking at Bobby Lashley and saying, man, he was just so mistreated in WWE. I mean, at least around the second time around. He was a multi-time WWE champion. He was pushed near the top of the card. He was a well-booked act for the majority of his time there in that second stint. So just because he is disgruntled about the way that it ends, I don't think we need to necessarily, and I'm not saying anybody in particular is doing this, but I think it's important to differentiate what Bobby Lashley is coming into versus someone like Malachi Black or Buddy Matthews.
Yes. Shea Penn says AW is actively pushing Hangman Page, Jay White, Darby Allin, Orange Cassidy, Private Party, Will Ospreay, Kazuchika Okada, Danny Garcia, Jack Perry, MJF, and Swerve. And yeah, I mean, I brought that up, and that's an even longer list than I brought up about some of them weren't featured on tonight's show necessarily. Well, actually, yeah, Jay White wasn't, and Ospreay wasn't. But I mean, it is, and Okada just sort of delivered a delicate tombstone and then sat backstage and watched bags be packed. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. This is not a 5-alarm fire. I mean, like, this is not, oh my God. In fact, you could make the argument maybe Tony Khan is cognizant of that, and that's why, even though Buddy Matthews and Malachi Black as WWE cast-offs were present, and Shelton Benjamin is holding his own, maybe that's more of an issue, more than holding his own, dominating your top guy, former recent world champ Swerve Strickland. when he was so not portrayed as anything close to that level of a threat in WWE very much at all over the last 2 decades. Maybe people are going to have more of a problem with that, and that was certainly something going into this week that some people were talking about. I think it was Zach Barber who made a case. I'm going to try to find it, that Shelton was seen as somebody. Oh yeah, here it is. Here comes the absolute disrespect of Shelton Benjamin. He's not Jinder Mahal. He's a guy who was criminally underutilized. What do you think about that, Brandon? That Shelton, it's not too late to give Shelton the type of push that he deserves, because he still looks good. He's working good matches. He's not the athlete he was 15, 20 years ago. It's pretty clear he slowed down, but he's adjusted his style. And there is wrestlers who are underutilized by WWE are better bets that fans will see them differently if AEW is the savior of their career, rather than looking like they're just glomming on to some WWE cast-off that WWE didn't want anymore, who are well past their prime and won't be able to live up to even the push they got in WWE and AEW.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any qualms with how with how they've been using Shelton Benjamin so far. I mean, I get the critique that maybe he was given a little too much against Swerve tonight, but he's a new act that they're just bringing in. They want to make sure that he looks good and looks strong, and Swerve beat him in the end. I mean, did I think it was a little bit hyperbolic for the announce team to make note of it being maybe the most impressive win of Swerve's career? And then I think Excalibur piped in and said, like, well, at least on Dynamite or something to that effect. Like, that might have been a little bit over the top. But as far as the match itself, like, I thought that what they did was fine. And I think that Benjamin deserves, a run that is predicated on respect, and I don't have any issue with him beating guys like Sammy Guevara and Lio Rush, who seem to have a very defined ceiling at this point on the AEW roster. I don't think that is anything to be upset over. And he lost in the end to Swerve, which is what should have happened. Swerve is higher on the card. So yeah, I'm good with the way that was handled.
Yep. I think the issue would just be, it's sort of the AEW method of, have a long match where who's going to win in the end, but it just goes a long time. That combined with Shelton being almost 50, not being treated as a credible top tier guy in WWE for 10, 15 plus years, suddenly coming in and not only beating a pillar in Sammy Guevara, who I know has been defined down and maybe justifiably so, and he's in a role that I defended last week. It's a fine role for him now. It's at the bottom of how I'd use him and feel comfortable, but I'm comfortable with it. He's a good hand, and I made the point last week. It's not shameful if his career is to be, an upper mid card guy who loses and is a gatekeeper of sorts. But so that's the issue with Shelton, is just, should he be holding his own against Swerve in a relatively long TV main event when the whole thing is just there to justify Bobby Lashley needing to come in? And to me, what we saw tonight is more of an Andrade Carmelo situation, which is, well, that was competitive. Maybe Shelton should get a rematch, more than, MVP needs to call in somebody bigger and better because Shelton isn't going to cut it. They made Shelton look so competitive against Shelton. They made Shelton look so competitive against Swerve that it actually takes away some of the, like, sort of the genesis of MVP feeling he needs to call in Lashley. Of course, there's a contrivance of what's Lashley even doing there if he isn't going to call him in, other than, as I did in mental gymnastics, say he was hanging out to celebrate Shelton's big win. Okay.
I think the other thing too is just that, when we talk about the idea of Shelton being underutilized, I think you can definitely make a case for that. But you have to look at it within the confines of the companies that he's worked in. And in the WWE umbrella, Shelton stood out because of his in-ring work, but he was never a particularly strong promo. And we know with the way WWE operates that you either need to be a strong promo to get a consistent, sustained push, or you need to get a groundswell of fan support so big that they just can't ignore you anymore because you're so good in the ring. And I don't think that Benjamin ever got to that point in WWE, and you could argue and make the case that WWE is to blame for that. But regardless, that never happened there. In AEW, he is one of many in that role. He is a guy who is supremely talented in the ring, has never been particularly strong on the microphone. AEW has a dozen or more of those guys. And so he's not going to stand out the way that he may have in WWE. And so I don't think that, there's going to be, at the end of the day, any conversation about him being underutilized there. I think that he'll settle in over time in the spot that he's supposed to be in, which is going to wind up being, sort of a heater for Lashley.
Yep. Okay, I'll read a few other comments, and then we'll get to Chris Lansdell, who's chimed in and wants to join the conversation here. But on the topic that we are on, the discussion of age in the mix of AEW's roster, Shea Penn says 2 of AEW's biggest signings this year have been Ospreay and Okada. They absolutely have looked outside of WWE to get stars, as well as focusing on their own. And then Derek Mitchell says, as well as pushing Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher. Then Ramen Noodle says, Deonna Purrazzo, Brian Keith, Queen Aminata, Okada all signed this year. Ospreay, White, Shibata, Nick Wayne, Briscoe, Valkyrie, Fletcher, and Davis, etc. in 2023. Zach Barber defends Shelton, saying he's not going to be world champ, but he deserves respect. And Derek Mitchell says, I don't think Shelton was criminally underutilized. He had some great moments in WWE, but he was never going to be a lead actor in WWE, but rather a supporting actor, regardless of his wrestling prowess. Dougie Doug, on the other hand, says, I don't think Tony realizes the more he pays tribute to things that happened 20 years ago, the more his 18 to 34-year-old audience collapses. Shelton was great in the early 2000s, and Nigel was wrestling on DVDs then. And Shea Penn says, also age means less than ever. Look, WWE's most used and top guys right now are Cody at 39, Roman at 39, Jay at 39, Seth at 38. That's crazy. Punk at 46, Drew at 39, Priest at 42, Balor at 43, Sammy at 40, Owens at 40, Knight at 41, and Orton at 44. I will say that I think there's a big difference between 39 and 49 and 50 and 54 and 57. I mean, that's, a decade. That's longer than most NFL running back careers. We're talking about in terms of the average difference with Shelton and Copeland and Jarrett and Jericho compared to Cody, Roman,
most NFL
Jay,
player careers in general, really.
That's true. Yeah. Star running backs don't last as long as the age difference between Seth and Lashley, just to grab two names. But yeah, Lady B says, Roman and Seth being close to 40 is wild. Time flies. And Ramen Noodle says, players go to new teams and turn into superstars all the time. It's all about the opportunity. Imagine every company keeping people at the level that Vince saw them at. I just don't agree with that. Yeah, I'm not sure. It shouldn't be a thing that happens, but I think Shelton is an extreme example of somebody who was just framed a certain way for a very long time. And you can't, at age 49, decide you're going to push him as a top guy. He's got to be a supplemental guy. And as Zach Barber points out, they're in good shape for their age, and they look young, and that certainly helps too. Okay, let's thanks everybody for your comments. I mean, it's everybody's comments in various realms. I think all adds to the conversation. I think very good points in terms of the number of names over the last 2 years that they've signed who are not WWE castoffs. So I think if anyone says that's all they do, they're showing partisanship. The question is when they do sign these people, is it pushing out opportunities for somebody who's just completely undiscovered, who they could use their platform to turn into a fast rising star and go after that younger demographic and not look like they're just chasing WWE's demographic, because WWE's doing a good job right now. You don't want to look like you're WWE Junior or WWE's AAA, where people get sent when they have lost their fastball, so to speak. All right, we'll go to Chris Lansdell. Welcome, Chris. How's it going? Now you have to figure out how to move left when you mean to move right.
We did it. We did it. We got that.
Good to see you.
Gents. It's good to be here. I'm off work for the next couple of days. So I figured I'd come in at 1 o'clock in the morning and chat wrestling. Why not? I wasn't going to do this age thing, mainly because I remember seeing Tyler Black in Toronto in 2010, and now I feel extremely old. I don't want to play this game anymore. I want to talk about this talent thing for a minute, because I think of the people that AEW has brought in from WWE, 2 of them, how arguably have actually benefited the product to any degree. Moxley, obviously. And I would argue that Christian Cage would be the other one.
Yeah.
Miro is still on this roster. Keith Lee is still on this roster. I'm saying that because you would never know it. But before Zach jumps on my back, look at the other direction. Who has WWE brought in that has done well for them from AEW? Arguably, only Cody. You could make it an argument for Ethan Page. He would be the other one.
Level. Yeah.
But I don't see Andrade was the speed champion for a while. And then you have Brian Pillman Jr. Arguing about which type of music is better. Like it's really very silly. My issue is that Tony hasn't made a star yet. MJF and Swerve made themselves. You could say Darby Allin, and I'd probably grant you that. But no matter where they came from, there's nobody that's gone to AEW that he has actively improved their standing in wrestling. And that is why it's a problem that he keeps bringing in WWE guys. He has to learn how to work with what he has before he starts trying to reclaim cast-offs. There's a reason Bill Belichick is hailed as one of the greatest coaches of all time. Is because he used to do that, right? He used to rehabilitate other teams' cast-offs and turn them into Super Bowl winning talent. Tony Khan is not Bill Belichick. I don't even think he owns a hoodie. So I think give the guy, let's see. Yeah, I see it. But let's see what he can do with some of these guys that he's halfway pushed. Let's see what he does with Danny Garcia. Let's see what he does with Sammy Guevara, if that's a reclamation project he can fire up. Then maybe I'll have some faith in the people that he's signing.
Well, Zach Barber says he also cheated a lot. Bill Belichick.
Valid.
Yeah. Yes.
Tony has a personality.
Yes. Yeah.
However, I wasn't planning to talk about that. I was planning to talk about the fact that there was a title change on this show, folks.
Yes.
I hate being a long-term wrestling fan. I really do, because as soon as whichever one of the guys from Private Party it was that got busted open within 5 minutes, as soon as that happened, I'm like, well, they're winning, because that was easily a comeback from the worst adversity type of thing.
Yeah.
Great match, I thought. Private Party showed an ability to actually tell a story that they haven't shown yet. I think this was their best showing on TV in a long time, cutting out the dancing, cutting out the playing to the crowd when the opponent is down, which I hear you're not a fan of, Wade. I really do like the way this match went, and I'm happy to see a team that doesn't have a history elsewhere getting a shot. And I think that this can go somewhere. I just hope they don't immediately drop it to Castagnoli and Pac, which I'm afraid is going to happen.
Yeah. So Zach Barber did a super chat and said, we should be popping bottles. The champagne should be flowing. The Bucks finally lost the titles. And it is a, going into this match, I mean, I think most people were thinking, oh, they're going to do an angle to break up Private Party, but it wasn't a foregone conclusion. I don't think it was like a consensus or virtual consensus on that. I agree with what you said, Chris, about it. Have a match that had more psychology, more of a story. You can kind of look back on the match and kind of imagine the chapters. It fit a more it's almost like FTR were guest bookers for a Young Bucks match. Okay, we're going to tell this story in the first segment, and then the next part we're going to do this, and then that's going to be a turning point that we're going to go back to later. We're going to have some ringside action, but not excessive. We're going to have one dive over the ropes, but we're not going to just do it a lot. I felt like it was a match where the moves they did mattered. I think Isaiah could do a little better letting his head actually hit the ringside steps instead of just banging his arm on it with 3 inches of space between his head and the ringside steps, if he's going to sell that he was rammed into metal steps and got cut open. I don't want him to give himself a concussion, but, I think you can mask that a little bit better. Being a pro wrestler is part magician, and you should have better sleight of hand than he showed there. So that jumped out. But yeah, I thought it was a good showing for Private Party overall. Brandon, were you surprised by this title change, and what do you think of the psychology of the match and how Private Party looked?
Yeah, not surprised. I could have gone either way. I thought that there was a decent chance of either situation happening. I I haven't been a huge proponent of Private Party, not because I don't think they're talented, but because it felt like they sort of were catapulted into that title match initially at Wrestle Dream without a lot of fanfare. And I get that there was some build done on the TV, but it just didn't feel like a lot. And that's been an issue with the tag team titles for months, largely since the Bucks won them. They felt like a total afterthought. So regardless of who they've been facing, it just hasn't felt like a particularly big deal. And Wade, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with this match being a pretty dramatic improvement over that match at Wrestle Dream. To me, it isn't just the recency bias of it. It's I can't tell you a single moment or spot from that Wrestle Dream match. It all just kind of blends together. The match was fine. Like it flowed well. It was a solid, like however long, sub 20 minutes of action. But it just wasn't particularly memorable. It was a Young Bucks match. And this one had the elements of that. It had all, the typical Young Bucks tropes. But I thought that it was segmented a little better. It did flow better. There was more memorable moments. I mean, I think, the Bucks dragging Quen up the ramp was a good way to sell the idea that that Zay was on his own and he couldn't possibly get this done at this point. And yeah, like Okada's tombstone didn't look particularly good and there had to be some shenanigans in there. But like for the most part, I thought it worked. If I were to have one small critique of the match itself, it's just that so often these Young Buck matches do devolve into we're going to hit this move that looks like it kills our opponent, but it's only worth a 1 count. Don't worry about it. And that's always been my criticism of the Young Bucks. And you just sort of have to resign yourself to that being a fact of life when you're watching their matches. So getting past that, I thought this worked well. And yeah, I like the idea of putting the tag team titles on what is more or less an AEW original team, a team that has, some would argue have been underutilized. I mean, they had moments with the Hardys back, when they were with the company and were students of Matt Hardy for a while, and none of that stuff worked. And I think getting back to basics with them, just tweaking the characters just enough to make them seem like more credible challengers and getting the crowd behind them, which they certainly succeeded in doing tonight. And I think that was a big positive because there have been many, many times where AEW has struggled to garner the desired crowd reaction for heels and baby faces. Yes. And this felt like a consequential win.
Well put. I think the crowd reaction of, I say it all the time, this is awesome, fight forever, holy shit. It's better than a bored crowd, but the peak wrestling reaction, if you're a wrestler that you should be striving for, is not what Jericho did, bragging about getting 4 out of 7 stars, which to me is barely above average these days based on the 7-star scale. But that's a whole other issue, Chris. But it should be getting a babyface pop if the goal is to be a babyface, and getting heel heat. And this match, I mean, I wonder if it kind of felt good for the Bucks to be like part of a match where it was structure. It was more structured, more curated, more memorable, had chapters, and actually got the kind of crowd investment. It earned a crowd investment that it didn't have at the beginning for some of the reasons we talked about, with the last pay-per-view match being sort of like mid-card forgettable, going through the motions, but a lot of motions that didn't add up to much and stick. This felt like it was it was a rush story. They could have done, if they had planned this 6 months ago, Private Party should have been built up. So this felt like a culmination of a journey instead of just a short-term push. But in a sense, I'll take what I can get if it's a short turnaround, in part because they are trying to take the Bucks in a new direction. And I think if we deconstruct this and look back, they want to take the Bucks in a new direction with a Moxley storyline reset. And for that to happen, they can't have the belts, or they need Private Party to have the belts. We'll kind of see which that is. Maybe it's both. And so they quickly tried to justify Private Party on the 5-year anniversary, which was convenient and made sense, and play off of that. And I think given the context of everything, they made it work. But yeah, ideally, there would have been 2-3 months or longer of Private Party seeming like a team where there was pent-up anticipation from fan support that they earned to see them finally get a title shot. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, the building up point, something I had noted here was the fact that when Private Party made their entrance, that Chiron said 2024 tag team record 2-1, which apparently gets you a title shot. So
yeah, maybe leave that.
Maybe
off.
Don't put that on there. Yeah. I really liked the way this match played out. I would be remiss if I didn't mention two things. First of all, there is no way that V-Trigger and the One-Winged Angel isn't to hint at who's going to be coming back in a couple of weeks as soon as he gets off his plane from Japan. Matt, do we have anyone covering Power Struggle? Do you know, Wade, maybe for the site?
Maybe no maybe. One. I was going to make a snide comment or a sarcastic comment, but no.
I'm excited now. I was even more excited when I saw that because Omega's just brilliant.
Yes.
But yeah, I think where they go from here is going to be the key. And with the Bucks, I don't think they can be faced anywhere near yet because they have to go through the Omega thing first before they come back to the face side. And Omega is probably going to lead the locker room against Moxley, and he's going to try and get the Bucks back on his side. And I think we're several months away from that working. Hopefully.
Let me throw to Brandon on that, because let's talk about the Moxley storyline and pivot or kind of flow from what happened with the Bucks and them showing, for people who didn't see the show, because a lot of you might not have, and you're just looking at us, listening to us analyze it. The Bucks showed good sportsmanship after losing. No heel tactics. They shook hands. They were respectful. Little hesitation. And then they did, it was a little corny for my taste, but, frantically packing their bags to leave the building and then scurrying out of the building and leaving poor Brandon Cutler behind, which felt too comical for the tone they struck afterwards when he got seriously beat down and they took a hammer to his hand. Was it Claudio? Claudio swung the hammer as Pac held him, if I recall right. So, tone-wise, more than a nitpick, I think that was wrong. I mean, but it's hard to do anything serious with Brandon. The Bucks have trouble ever being serious also, but Brandon especially. Everything is sort of ironic with them and kind of, Clubhouse, YouTube, dorm room humor. So with that aside, though, there do seem to be setting up, and Omega's getting healthy now. So they need stronger baby faces. I'm fine with Orange Cassidy, and he cut that opening show promo and did a good job. And I'm fine with him being a step up from Dark Order, and in terms of and Action Andretti as the first, kind of people to plow through. And I think they did a good job making it seem like Cassidy is more than just a gatekeeper who's inevitably going to fall. But Kenny Omega, if he comes back, EVP along with the Bucks, there's that history. Obviously, he's a top star in the AEW universe and for their fan base. And so having him stand up to Moxley and crew does seem to be a logical direction they're going. So, Brandon, your thoughts? I know I threw a lot out there. You take it away.
Yeah, the Moxley angle so far has not worked for me. I like the tone. I like the way that Moxley is carrying himself. Yeah. I like the level of perceived violence that they're putting out there. I like how united they are, how it comes off as this existential threat to the company. But what I don't like, and I don't quite understand yet, is why the guys being picked out are the guys being picked out short of them being baby faces. Because the argument right now from Moxley is he speaks, mostly in riddles, and he says that, he's saving AEW, he's rescuing it from the doldrums of, complacency and all of these things. But there are examples of complacency on the AEW roster that you can legitimately point to, and none of them are the guys that they're out there attacking. Yeah. If your motivation is to end this complacency and to strike back at the people who you perceive as just being there to collect a paycheck, then the very last person on the roster that you should attack or draw your ire to is Bryan Danielson. So, why is that happening other than Danielson is the babyface?
On Collision, I believe in the sit-down interview with Claudio, they were talking about how Danielson was symbolic because he happened to be at the top. But it is a challenge to because Moxley even said, I don't expect you to understand, Orange Cassidy, why we're doing what we're doing. You will in time. There's sort of this expression of faith. It will make sense in the end. Stick with us. But when the key line, as you point out, Brandon, is, I don't want Cassidy to catch the disease or the spell that so many others in AEW are under, where they are fat and happy with their paychecks and think there's something they're not. Eventually, that should land as seeming true, it either should be true and aimed at somebody where you could imagine Moxley thinking that, or it's aimed at somebody where it's not true, and that makes Moxley a heel for saying something that isn't true, but at least we know who he's talking about. And at this point, I don't think it fits either category. It's not true about anybody who's stepping up. I don't think anyone is like, oh yeah, he's talking about Dante Martin. Like no one's thinking that. Like, what? I mean, Evil Uno seems like he's always been about the same weight. And he go to war against AEW over someone who's, honestly, Evil Uno might be fat and happy with his paycheck. I don't know, but that's certainly not the crux of the storyline. And no one is thinking that, but you have to search for it, and it should be more obvious. But I give Moxley credit for acknowledging what people are thinking, which is, I don't understand this. And he's acknowledging it, going, nobody understands it yet. We have a mission. It'll become more clear over time.
See, I think it's all pretty clear to me. All right. I've had this booked out like a year and a half in advance, but basically, first of all, Jon Moxley's at the level he's on for promos is so far above anyone else in the company and possibly in professional wrestling. It really stands out. I thought he was excellent tonight. He barely raised his voice.
Yes.
Everything sounded natural. Even he threw in the odd vocal tick, the odd and just to make it sound more natural. It no point sounded like he was hesitating or struggling. It just sounded like a natural way of speaking, which is one of the hardest things to do. As a public speaker myself, very, very difficult to come off like that.
Yeah.
Jon Moxley and his crew are going after people who do not take wrestling seriously. And they are specifically not going after the people who do. They have not targeted Darby Allin, for example, for a beatdown. They have beaten him up when he's tried to save others, but they haven't explicitly gone after him. They haven't explicitly gone after Garcia.
So you're saying Top Flight dressed up as flight crew as a setup for Moxley to say you're not taking things seriously. We now have a good explanation for that little that 3-4 week period.
That is a Zach Barber style straw man that you have put in my mouth. I think what they're doing there, if you look at it, Dark Order, Private Party, they went after to start with. Top Flight, like you said, the best friends. They've gone after people who are jokes. The Outriders were probably going to be next.
Yeah.
So that is their goal. Bryan Danielson was taken out because he held the key to being on top. What I think everybody has I haven't heard anyone talking about this. Tony Khan is behind this. He is the person who is leading Jon Moxley. It's the only thing that makes sense, because that's the reason he hasn't been suspended or fired, nor has the rest of the group. And he is trying to regain control of his own company, tying it all the way back to when the Bucks pile drove him. He is regaining control, getting rid of all the jokes. Dark Order was the one thing that made him take over creative control in the first place. We know that because we're deep into the wrestling lore. But they can tie all of this together by making Tony Khan that higher power.
Is he the heel or the babyface in all this?
Oh, he's the heel, 100%.
Okay. Because I was going to say attempted murder and brain damage and it was Nigel talking with Wheeler Yuta, not Claudio. Zach jumped in with that. You can't have a plastic bag over someone's head and brag about brain damage and then end up in the end going full circle and going, well, Tony Khan authorized it as a babyface because he didn't like lazy wrestlers taking advantage of him as a generous promoter writing up.
I just need them to keep him off TV as much as possible or have someone talk for him. But I honestly think Tony Khan is going to be involved in this somehow because it ties everything together nicely. I don't know the Orange Cassidy. I don't know how he has managed to escape the beatdowns because he's the epitome of a joke. That is the hole in my theory, and I will freely admit that. Mm-hmm. Maybe because when he has to be serious, he can be. But going back to that segment, was I alone in having very nasty flashbacks when it looked like Darby Allin was caught up in that harness and couldn't get free of it? I was terrified because he came down ragdolled, and I'm like, oh,
yeah, it's ragdolled, yeah.
And I was so worried for his safety. And then he started moving, but he couldn't get the hook off. So they had to cut the camera away. I'm glad they had the common sense to do that, because, I mean, we had 90 seconds left, and last week we heard him tell Adam Cole to stop on the ramp and pose for a bit. I thought for sure they were going to show Marina Shafir trying to rescue him from the harness while beating him up.
Yeah.
But that was a very scary moment for me. I don't know if anybody else had the same thoughts.
I didn't notice that as much, but I'd have to go back and rewatch. He looked like he was ragdolled when he's coming down, and then the table collapsed unexpectedly, and that was awkward. But I missed him not being able to get himself hooked up. Brandon, did you?
I noticed it only because when I did the Wrestling Night in America for Wrestle Dream at the beginning of the month, we were talking about the fact that, you know, the way that the announcer sold the beatdown on Danielson at the end of the show, and a couple of people in the chat brought this up as well. It was almost too reminiscent to Owen Hart. And I mean, to hear that and then think about it when you're watching Darby descend from the ceiling, you kind of, in your brain, you kind of make that connection. And obviously that's not what they're going for. And it's not like I thought that this was in poor taste or anything, but I made that connection because of that moment that I had on the post show where people were like, hey, they went so hard with this, with the horror of it all, that it felt like that moment.
Yeah. You're muted, Wade.
Let me bring in some chat room comments, Chris, on this, because you brought a lot of.
I sense they don't like my theory.
No, it's a mix, as most topics here, which is why I love having the chat room open. So I'll start with Zach Barber going. I was with you, Chris, right up until you brought Tony into it. And that seems to be a crux. Lady B says Tony is way too awkward for what Chris is describing. Ramen Noodle, everyone's sitting down. Maybe it's ShadCon instead. LOL. He's going to come in and be an on-air character. Chris, as you noted, he can't carry the role on camera, but the storyline makes sense. You're defending yourself in the chat.
Multitasking.
Yes. Artwork says only one thing wrong with that, Chris. Awkward, ridiculous Tony Khan becoming a regular character on TV will cripple their ratings and put them out of business in less than a month. That is not going to happen. I think you can make your case without the a little over the top prediction that they'll be out of it. For example, Joe Schmo says if this leads to Tony, it's going to take the air out of the room. That could happen, but he's been enough of an on-air character. I think there's a way to make that work, but it would be him not having to carry mic work.
Yeah.
Is he still going to come out and yell at crowds before and after tapings, though?
Oh, that'd be so hard for him not to. That would
he has to come out in the full robe and goes, "It was me, Darby. It was me all along."
So Chris, the one thing that I'm wondering with that theory, and I do think that it's plausible and it makes sense, but my concern is if that is the idea here, how do you pivot Moxley's crew to taking on actual threats that do not fit the profile of what you're describing? Because most of those guys are, lower card enhancement talent, and they're going to have to face the big guns. Does it just become a matter of the big guns come after them, so they're forced? Or
I think it goes to what you see with Darby Allin, where he's like, because at the base of it, it's still Blackpool Combat Club. They've just taken a more sinister take. So they're like, yeah, we'll fight you. We love fighting. We don't care. Come on, let's do it. They said, you either get behind us or you get out of the way. If people are not doing what they're accusing them of doing and just want to fight them, they will fight them, and they won't have an issue with it. That to me is the best kind of heel, the one who isn't afraid and will take anyone on and just uses underhanded tactics to stay where they are. Like, look, Ric Flair was great at that. I mean, and John Moxley is no Ric Flair in the ring, maybe on the mic, but I think there's legs to it. I'm conscious of taking up too much time though, so I don't want to monopolize this. I did have one more quick point I wanted to touch on.
Say that for 1 sec, because I do like the idea. Again, this is meant it's mental gymnastics now, but if it is what they're planning and it has been the master plan and all the pieces fall into place, then it's more us just prognosticating how this will all fall into place. The idea that Moxley is going after people who aren't serious. I like that as a concept to try to explain, the building blocks of this and the path we're on. They're, having Jeff Jarrett and Makhan Singh and
Makhan Singh. Wow, we just went back 40 years.
I did. I'm like, wait, that's not right. What is?
No, but the lunatic. Name? What's he doing in the Dynamite Zone?
What's the Giant's name?
Satnam Singh.
Satnam Singh. Thank you. Yes. I'm doing my posting our 20 and 30 years ago Raw reports and stuff, and so I have all these historical names in my head when I read over these old reports too. It gets fresh in my head. So what was I going to say about that though? So yeah, there's a lot. It's kind of a clown, it's sort of a clown show waiting for them out in the parking lot. And so the downside one is, why are they the only ones stepping up right now? And is that a good look at the beginning of this with how heavy the angle is? I guess everybody kind of has their own thing. Adam Cole's preoccupied with MJF. Kenny Omega's not around. Swerve Strickland's got a thing going on with MVP. I mean, I guess a defender of AEW's booking and presentation would be, we are explaining it. It's not like top guys are hanging out and just not busy but not helping. The idea is, and this is, kind of creative license, or, you give a little room for it. It's they have other things going on and they're preoccupied with that, and it'll come around to them, eventually. So yeah, I'm kind of, thinking through it. I mean, the idea that Moxley's going to say we have too many people who are light comedy figures, hanging out and ruining the tone of the show. Then you just get into the issue. Is that really being a heel? Are Dark Order and are they beloved enough? Is Action Andretti and Top Flight beloved enough? And the Best Friends and Chuck Taylor, where fans are going to be upset by this, or are they ultimately going to look at Moxley and go, well, we like Bryan Danielson, but if he had to die for the cause, we're up for it if it means getting rid of Dark Order.
They were already chanting for Moxley tonight.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Do you want fans disconnected from what you're doing? And again, this is an argument not to burn houses down and suffocate people, because you don't want, if someone is if you mute the TV and you just out of the corner of your eye see Moxley, and you're not even a wrestling fan. If you look at a TV, like you're walking past a neighbor's window and you're not a fan and they have Moxley on, you're like, oh, that looks like pro wrestling's top star. Like, he carries himself. Like, that guy commands my attention. That was always his thing in the Shield. I said it back when he debuted in the Shield. Moxley's innate skill that you can't really easily develop, and maybe not even develop, is he looked like that you owed him your attention. Anything he did, he conveyed, I deserve your full attention. And he has that, and the cool factor, and the intensity, and all of that. And so it's just a case of, can they, take a storyline and keep it within the parameters of what ultimately can make sense, and they don't just get, hey, here's an idea, let's try to suffocate someone twice. By the way, before you move on, Chris, the Wheeler Yuta angle, did it come across like the announcers didn't understand that Yuta was in on it? Because they never did it. I'm assuming Yuta was acting, that it was to draw, create a circumstance where it was a ploy, because it doesn't make sense otherwise that they didn't attack him and then he joined in on the attack. Or is this mind games with Yuta where they're messing with him and it's like a pledge and they're testing him? What happened there? Chris, I saw you emoting as I talked, so give me your theory.
I'm not convinced. They always did pick on Yuta, even when they were faces. And right after they let him go, Shafir goes over to him in the corner, grabs him by the lapels, and slaps him in the face a couple of times. And then he gets up and starts taking part in the beatdown. If he had popped right up and started smiling or laughing, I would have been more on board. I think he's just genuinely their whipping boy.
Do you like how that played out then?
I do.
Yeah. Brandon, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily sure. I thought the Shafir bit in the corner kind of clued into the idea that maybe he wasn't part of it, and that they were just doing what they've always done to Yuta, which I mean, I guess makes sense. Like, the idea that he was hesitant to get on board at first, so they're still kind of testing his loyalty in some way. I think if that hadn't brought Cassidy out, then they would have just done it.
Yeah. I guess I'll have to. Do you think they'll address that it'll be part of the ongoing like mind games they're playing with this poor guy?
Moxley bite.
Yeah. I don't expect it to be anything more than it's been in the past. I mean, it sort of feels like just a continuation of what he always was in the BCC.
And as Shea Penn points out, I love how Yuta's still showing his hesitation. He's going along with it, but you can still see it all doesn't sit right with him. Aside from Shafir and Pac holding him down, and then Claudio threatening him with a chair before Orange Cassidy ran out to save him. And then Yuta just joining in and stomping away at Cassidy after he was about to be, have his neck broken or be beheaded or whatever the next crazy over-the-top thing Moxley and his crew were going to do. Now he's trying to re-earn their loyalty or their belief that he's on their side. I mean, I don't know. I'm in the moment having trouble putting that together in a logical way without it being Yuta was in on it. But as you point out, the Shafir conversation, quote unquote, afterwards to let him know whatever she let him know. I'm looking for something that ties it together for me so it makes sense, because at the moment I'm not seeing it. So chat room, help us out too. If come on, Zach, explain this. Yeah, go ahead.
He has looked hesitant too, like as was pointed out, and so I wonder if we will sometimes harp on promotions for not acknowledging that a wrestler who is on the show can go back and watch the show later. So, I don't think we should necessarily rule out that members of this group are watching Yuta in playback and seeing the way that he's reacting to the things that they're doing and the hesitation. And so they're continuing to test him.
Yep. Chris, you got a fan? T in the chat goes, "Hey, Chris, love your work, mate." And Ramen Noodle says, "I plan on spreading this conspiracy theory far and wide. It's a spoiler as far as I'm concerned." So you've won over Ramen Noodle, Chris.
If this actually happens, I might just retire on the proceeds. I just want to say that I think for Yuta, he's fine with stomping on people. He's fine with wrestling moves. He might even be okay with a normal chair shot to the back. I think he draws the line of trying to actually put people out of the business. I think that's where his reluctance comes in. And that, funnily enough, that's where I draw the line on interference as well. If it's normal just beating someone down, it doesn't feel as bad. But when you start introducing things like sledgehammers and plastic bags and stuff, it just takes me completely out of the game.
Chris, before you move on to a fresh point, I want to just interject more chat comments here and then move on, because I think there's some good things being said here. One, if Joe Schmo says, if we go with Tony being a part of this, couldn't he just fire the people he doesn't want there? So you'd have to have that explanation, which is Tony wants to send a message to people he hired and thought that they would take wrestling more seriously. This isn't WWE cartoon land, and so I needed Moxley to send a message. I mean, I guess you could maybe make that argument. Yep. Derek Mitchell says, "It's an interesting take, Chris, but Moxley and crew targeting wrestlers who don't take wrestling seriously. Are they going to go after Maximum Male Models, the Outrunners, and the Iron Savages?" Chris?
I think the Outrunners, I expected it to happen when they came out for no reason to dance around with FTR. I think the fact that it was FTR in the ring with them may have saved them, but I expect the Outrunners will be targeted. The Iron Savages, are they on Ring of Honor? I don't know. Yeah. I don't see them. They could get rid of that guy that's with them that is just incredibly annoying. Maximum Male Models are heels, so no.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that counts. Shea Penn says, "You didn't want to put the bag over Brian's head. He showed remorse. Last week he didn't want to step on Chuck Taylor's neck, so Claudio stepped on it to do it." I mean, I know he's not on board, but man, if they're about to sacrifice you with a chair around your neck and then Marina Shafir pep talk gets you to join in on beating down Orange Cassidy, I don't know. So Zach Barber says, exactly, Yuta isn't fully on board yet. And Derek Mitchell says, "Not a fan of a top heel faction attacking younger mid-card guys. Here's an old school reference. I want to see the Horsemen feuding with top stars, not feuding with the Mulkey brothers and George South." I think they're, believe it or not, the Mulkeys and George South are beneath even Dark Order and Top Flight and Action Andretti in this example. But I like Derek bringing the history. And then Ramen Noodle says, "Yuta's like the lowest member of a prison gang, loyal but bullied by people he both fears and admires, afraid to be hurt, but most afraid to be alone." I think that's the best framing of his character if you're introducing someone to the AEW product right now.
Yep.
Standard Deviation says, I love the dynamic between Yuta and the Death Riders. The psychology is consistent with someone being drafted to go to war and falling in line with a brutal commander's orders. That is true. Okay. Brandon, anything you want to add before we throw to Chris to change topics? Okay, cool. Yep. So Chris, over to you.
This one will be a little quicker.
Yeah.
Kyle Fletcher channeling a 6'3" version of Tyson Kidd with the haircut. I was worried about how it would look, but I actually kind of dug it.
Yeah.
Tony Schiavone saying Mark Davis is getting a hell of a reaction. Not in the arena, he wasn't.
No.
He did in my living room. I'll give him that.
Oh my God, that was funny.
But I think 4 people cheered and 3 of them were wrestlers. I did like that segment. I've never heard Mark Davis cut a promo. I was not offended by it. I thought he did a decent job. He got the points across. He wasn't wooden. I thought he could have put some more emotion into it, but I give the guy a break. It's his first time back on TV in a long time, and he's probably not cut a promo in English in a decade or more. But I'm curious where you think that's going to go, because that tag team is too good to break up. But they've also done all this work to position Kyle Fletcher now as a singles guy. I don't know which way I would favor going with that. You're muted.
I actually tried to unmute, and I actually wasn't muted, and I muted myself. I did it in reverse. You have Takeshita. So if Takeshita's going to be the guy you're really going with hard, giving Kyle Fletcher something else to do for a while with an established tag partner to strengthen the tag division and maybe go after Private Party, that works. I mean, I'm okay with that. Because Takeshita, in the Don Callis family, it'd be tough to have just 2 not fully established top guys where the order isn't real obvious, and you're sort of defining somebody down almost by definition if they're not the ones being pushed. But there's so many titles. I guess you can have Takeshita choose one and Kyle choose the other, and they're both somewhat equal titles, and you go that route.
I mean, Takeshita has one, so
or keep one and Kyle goes after another, and they try to belt collect. Good clarification. And then you have Fletcher. Well, and then Fletcher with a haircut. I think that works. I was nervous about it. Yeah. I mean, he's a good-looking guy who, with a shaved head, still looks like a star. The hair he had was distinct. It set him apart. There's a lot of guys with bald heads and short-cut hair out there. But I think it worked, and it also, even if it's a step back in terms of having something like really distinct, because there's a lot of guys who can't grow the head of hair that Kyle can, who are very jealous and are like, what are you doing? Shaving your head. If I could grow my hair out, I would. So I think it's worth sacrificing that to signal a new start. Like I'm look at me differently because I look different. Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm of the mindset of keeping Aussie Open together, largely because I do think that there is some risk you take by juxtaposing Kyle Fletcher and Konosuke Takeshita, who you're trying to get over now as a singles act within the Don Callis family. I like the idea of these 3 guys being the primary focal point of the Callis family, and being in a situation where Takeshita can sort of be the in-ring leader and Aussie Open can go after the tag team titles. I think that it's really important to have some credible challengers for the tag team titles and really sort of get back to the first couple of years of AEW in that regard, where the tag team titles held a great deal of importance and were often featured, in Dynamite main events and were looked at as this big deal. And so much of the last couple of years or so, the tag team titles have felt more like an afterthought, and they've often played hot potato with them. So I think that Aussie Open is a great, a great act to bolster that division and really give a solid heel anchor to it, along with Callis, doing the managerial work. I also think where they've just sort of started with this Kyle Fletcher singles push, he's already lost a decent number of singles matches against, bigger name AEW talent. So the idea of putting him back in a tag team where he can be dominant with Mark Davis for a while, and then maybe, a year or so down the road, revisiting that singles push because he's a really young guy. There's nothing that says you can't go back to this and try it again in a year when people have more or less forgotten about, the losses that he's taken to Will Ospreay, for example.
You don't
Chris,
think that it's a bit of a step back, though? Because you have done a lot of work in making him seem like he's an actual star, right? And you've made him a threat to Ospreay. You've given him a new look. He had a title for a while, but it wasn't Ring of Honor one. To put him now into a tag team with a guy who hasn't had any work done is considerably older. I think there's a 10-year difference between them. I love them as a team. I would love to see them back as a team. I just feel like if you're going to put that much work into Fletcher and then put him back with Davis, you're almost pushing him back down the ladder just when you were starting to shine him up. And that's what we've complained about AEW doing so much with the stop pushing.
But I think you could put them together, kind of reframe how people look at Davis too, give him a new look, have them under Callis be consistently pushed, beat Private Party, have a good feud, kind of recast the tag division as them being the dominant head of a new era, and have one, top babyface team after another come after him. I mean, you could make 2025 the year of those two in the Callis family, with Takeshita being a dominant singles. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think that Fletcher and Davis have been defined down to the degree that you can't rev them up, especially with a long break between them, even being Davis being out and not even be able to team, since Fletcher has grown since Davis was gone. And I just don't think there's a lot of hard baked in memories of Davis being like a scrub who was just a lower mid card tag guy. So yeah, I don't know. I'm open to that if that's the direction they go. More initially than I think you are, Chris. Brandon, anything to add?
I think it all depends on how you choose to frame the tag titles, because I agree. If you're looking at Fletcher and Davis going after like the 2023-2024 incarnation of the tag team titles, then I would agree that it seems like a step down for Fletcher, and I certainly wouldn't advocate for that. What I would like to see happen is for AEW to dramatically improve the importance of the tag team titles, to get it to a point where it does feel like they could main event shows again. And then I don't think you have that so much concern about demoting Kyle Fletcher as you do, like, hey, he is involved with his partner in this major heel faction in major storylines for a very coveted championship.
Couple chat room comments. Lady B says, Fletcher looks like the type of guy Sabrina Carpenter or Olivia Rodrigo writes songs about. So I hope they continue down this route of him being like a Gen Z bad boy. That would be different.
I don't know who either of those people are, just reinforcing how old I feel tonight.
But from context, I think you get what you're saying. I just hope they keep having Kyle on TV, because he has a chance. He's 25 years old, and I mean, we talk about, is Will Ospreay the future? Is Okada the future? They're all guys in their 30s, and I'm all for Ospreay being the centerpiece for 5-6 years, if they want to go that route. But Fletcher, very early on, caught my eye as somebody who there's something, kind of a young John Cena thing, or young Roman Reigns. Like there's a even Moxley too. Like there's a star power innate, can't teach it. It's it's easy to not look if you just go, he's just in a tag team and they're gonna just be utility guys. But there's something there, and he stepped up. I mean, last week was a coming out promo for him. Tonight he was good. He's got the new look, and he kind of believes in himself. Like he's carrying himself like he is a star, and there's something credible, almost too credible for a heel, when he's talking about Ospreay kept us close to keep us down. So he could shine. So anyway, Standard Deviation says, I don't see much value in a solo run for a 34-year-old Mark Davis. He offers more value as one half of Aussie Open. Yeah, if Mark Davis, if he isn't in the tag team, I'm trying to think of a tag team analogy that isn't Marty Jannetty, where Devon, they break him up, and it's like you're not going to be the star. It's going to be Bubba Ray. He's the one who's going to, go on to be a singles guy, and you're left having a little push, and then it just goes away, and you got to kind of recast yourself on the mid card, which seems like what would be what happens with him. I don't think there is anything else on this topic. Oh, Ramen Noodle says, my daughter thinks Callis is dressing Fletcher as a delusional version of how he sees himself. I don't think that's happening, but I wouldn't mind that as a storyline of Callis sort of living vicariously through Kyle Fletcher, sort of an undertone. And I hope, I'd love to see Callis and Fletcher be what we all, I say that broadly, too optimistically, but what we all, I think we're hoping Callis and Omega would be, a wrestler and a manager who sort of, I don't say define an era, that's too aspirational, but they're part of an era, and you think about those two together as sort of inseparable. And I think that has more upside than Takeshita, although let's go with Takeshita for a while, but a long-term Callis-Fletcher dynamic can work. And then ultimately Fletcher, with his size, his looks, his charisma, he's going to be a top babyface for AEW, but I'm fine waiting until a big moment 6 years from now for that to happen when he's 31. Let's not rush anything. And AEW's got some financial security for at least a few years. I think they can think long term now. And let's see. Oh, one thing going back in time, King of Strong Style said, Chris, your idea is okay, but the characters in the story, especially the faces, just isn't working. The crowd was cheering Mox because he's the only real star. And that's the danger. If you want someone really cool to be booed, you got to put him against somebody who's also really popular. That plays into Derek Mitchell's comment, which is, I'm curious what you guys think about the lack of enthusiasm that seems to be prevalent every week from the live AEW audience. To me, it hurts the presentation along with the commentary team.
4,000 in a 15,000 building is not going to sound enthusiastic.
No, and I don't think did they hit? I don't think they hit 4. They hit at Showtime. It was 3487. Yeah, 3487 according to WrestleTix. That's distributed. That's not even sold. That includes whatever 2-for-1s, comps, family, friends, just occupied seats according to WrestleTix and how they calculate this. So, and it's better than Collision on Saturday, but it's a problem. When we talk about creating a star, Brandon, part of becoming a star is looking like you're a star, and part of looking like you're a star is having a crowd audibly reacting to you in a way that feels like it's a full building, and visually looking like you're a draw. And AEW doesn't want to show clips from their debut Dynamite, like on their 5-year anniversary. We didn't, get, because it's going to show how far they've fallen in terms of atmosphere, in terms of crowd enthusiasm. That's something they just don't want to draw attention to. But of course, you can solve that if Kyle Fletcher, for instance, or anyone turns into a draw, or this Moxley thing takes off, you're going to start drawing bigger crowds. I don't care how much money I care, but in this context, it's not important how much TBS and TNT are willing to pay for your programming. That's nice. It keeps you in business, and that's what Tony Khan cares about, his bank account cares about. But the metric that counts in terms of, are you really a successful promoter and booker, and are you doing things the right way, it's ticket sales. Now, you can alter that with overpricing them or under-marketing them. There's all kinds of X factors that can play into it. It's not a pure statistic, but it's the most valuable statistic in the short run. When you revisit a town, do you draw more people? And overall, is your average attendance solid? And right now, it's not. Brandon, talk about that atmosphere aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that it's a consistent problem week in and week out, virtually no matter what city they're in. You get, and the worst part for them is that they are able to achieve such a drastically different atmosphere on pay-per-view that it makes the TV that much more glaring, because generally speaking, they are getting the crowds for pay-per-views. And even though they may not be as big as they once were, they're more or less filling the seats that they've allotted for those events. And so the arena sounds full. You're not getting the echoes. You're not getting the silence in between things. You're not, as I pointed out at the start of the show, able to hear them counting down the number of seconds left in the broadcast because the venue is full enough. And, to that point, they're actually, I've been paying close attention to this because they're making their debut in their most northeastern location in the company's history next week. They're coming to Manchester, New Hampshire, my neck of the woods. Show is only about 2 hours and 15 minutes away from me. I've chosen not to attend because the crowd just doesn't, the card doesn't entice me to make the drive down. But if you look at, the seating map right now, a week out from the show, and I checked this just before we came on the air, they haven't even released tickets coming around the side of the ring. I mean, it's cutting off it's cutting off behind the announcers. And this is another 14,000 seat arena that they're going to probably put 28 to 3,800 people in. I mean, that's not great for a debut in a state. Like, it's just continuously, it's continuously going to be a problem and sound like a problem. And it makes guys feel like lesser stars than they ought to be. And it's unfortunate, but I don't know how you solve that issue right now, short of, sort of a really significant change in booking philosophy.
I think the simplest solution is to take oh God, I can't believe I'm about to say this sentence. Take a page out of TNA's book. Run smaller buildings.
Yeah.
You look at the best example of that is PWG, right? They could sell out much bigger buildings, but they don't because they like the idea that it's a hot ticket. We've got a stadium here in town that holds 5,000 people. They'd sell it out because we don't get wrestling here. But you can't run 14, 15,000 seat arenas if you're putting 5,000 people in there, because no matter how good the crowd is, it's going to sound awful. The problem is a lot of the people on this roster are used to wrestling in front of 500 people. So for them, this is a huge step up, right? Even Okada, if you look at some of the New Japan shows that aren't the big pay-per-views, they're wrestling in sumo halls with 500, 600 people there. It is not hard to get a ticket to a non-big New Japan show. So this is a big crowd even for him. Obviously, for people like Adam Copeland and stuff, it isn't. But the issue isn't necessarily the crowd size. It's the noise. It's the fact that nobody seems like a big deal. WWE draws casual fans because stuff happens at their events that is fun. It's fun to scream "whoa" at the top of your lungs when Cody Rhodes comes out, or sing along with Seth Rollins' theme. There is nothing on AEW's presentation that is fun for the audience to get involved in. Yes, it's good wrestling, but I don't need to be in the arena to see good wrestling. In fact, it's better to watch good wrestling from home because you get more angles. They need to do something with that in-arena presentation to make it so that the people who are there feel like they've gone to something that they enjoyed. I don't want to pay $50 to get a bad view of half the action.
Yeah. And it's kind of like going to a nightclub, in your 20s or 30, whatever. You're like, you don't want to go to a club and walk in and there's like 3 people on one side of the wall and 2 people at a bar and there's music playing. And it's like, what am I going to do? Like there's something about having a lot of people in the club that adds energy, and wrestling is that way. WWE, and we hear it a lot from people attending WWE shows, it feels like a party. You want to be part of it, and that's why WWE can charge these crazy high prices for tickets, because you just want to say you were there. That was there for AEW early on, and they have driven those people away. And they've been pulled away by WWE improving their product and the end of Vince McMahon and all kinds of stuff going on, the end of the John Cena era. It's a problem. I mean, it is. And Standard Deviation chimed in on this. It'll take time to turn these crowds around. It negatively affects the TV viewer perception of the current stories and matches. There's no quick fix. They have to stick with a long-term plan. The question is, do they have a long-term plan? The King of Strong Style, what can they do in the short term? We talked about it. Go to smaller buildings. But again, you start looking minor league and you're on national cable television and you've got some big stars, and suddenly the size of the venue you're in makes Moxley look more comparable to Trick Williams and Ethan Page than it does, Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes. That visual, the optics can define you down, and it's hard to break out of that. And I say this a lot, but a year plus ago, I was very down on Collision, not for TV rights money. I know they're going to get more TV rights money, and I repeat this all the time, but my biggest concern with Collision is watering down the live attendance and what that was going to do to the energy. And once you get below a certain point, Brandon, you're like, I don't know if I want to go there. If it was a sold out crowd and it's going to be, even ECW Arena, when I went to the mid 90s, it was, hundreds of people, 1,000 plus, whatever. But you wanted to be there because it was talk about a packed nightclub atmosphere. I mean, it was amazing and awesome to be part of that energy level. And now you're sitting there and you're just looking around at all these darkened buildings in the upper deck, and it's not as fun. And Collision has hurt. People don't have that desire, that pent up desire, that lack of access to AEW has been cut in half. Now you're getting AEW more often than you want, and you have to be red hot. And I know they thought they would have CM Punk, and they were, thought they would have some momentum, and a lot of things went wrong, and Adam Cole got hurt, and MJF went off the rails with his storyline. I mean, Kenny Omega, there's all kinds of bad things that happen, but you have to prepare for that possibility when you do things, and they expanded too fast.
I don't think you could realistically have prepared for CM Punk, Kenny Omega, Adam Cole, MJF, and Jay White all being injured at the same time. I think two of those you could have prepared for, but they lost so many top names in such a short period. I can cut them a little bit of slack there.
A little bit, but it you know what? I mean, before they all got injured, I was saying Collision's a mistake, or the biggest downside of Collision is they're going to be going to cities twice as often or going to smaller buildings. And one of the big advantages AEW had in those early months when we were critiquing the product, and people can hear it. We put up the 5 years ago flashback shows every weekend now on Dynamite, and you're going to see, if you listen every week, our top critique. And I'd say this, no matter what we critiqued about the AEW Dynamite product, we said the crowd is the MVP. They're turning these unknowns into stars, the pillars into stars. And it's a red hot product, and you want to be there for these shows. And that's gone. Some of it is they blew it with bad decisions. Yeah, Brandon.
And we were comparing it favorably to WWE's crowds at the time too, and saying how much more alive their shows felt because of the crowd participation and the reaction. And I remember, I mean, the first time I went to AEW was a Dynamite taping in Boston a couple of years back, and I called in for you, Wade, after for the post show, and I remember talking, after that I was out in the lobby during the beginning of the taping of Rampage, and there was an energy in that building that felt unlike anything that I had experienced with WWE in quite a long time. And then I went back a year later for their debut at TD Garden, which was a much larger venue than they had previously run in Boston. And they had excellent attendance for that show. Don't get me wrong. I think for Blood and Guts, they had somewhere in the ballpark of like 11,000. So, much more than they're pulling, on a regular basis at this point. But already there was a shift at that point. People were still going, but there was a shift in the way in which the crowd was reacting to things. And it almost felt when that first show that I attended in Boston, it was sold out, first of all. And it almost felt like you were part of something exclusive, that you were part of something that no one else had quite figured out yet. And by the time Blood and Guts rolled around, it was still a great crowd, don't get me wrong, but it felt more akin to what I had grown accustomed to the last 5 or 6 years of going to WWE shows. Something didn't feel quite as rabid, quite as passionate. People still enjoyed themselves. It just didn't have that same energy. And I think that energy has only continued to slump as time has gone on.
I echo that sentiment completely. I was at Forbidden Door 2023, and I have never felt an atmosphere like that for Omega's entrance, for Will Ospreay's entrance, for Okada and Danielson's entrances in that match. Just everything on that show. Even Tanahashi, who had that massive botch where he slipped on the top rope on Collision the night before, him coming out against MJF. And this is a sold-out Scotiabank Arena where the Raptors play. Obviously, it was reconfigured, but they had 15,000 plus in there. And it was incredible. They could not fill the Ted Reeve Arena in Toronto now, which holds 1,500, where ROH used to run shows. And the atmosphere for those shows, which I went to in 2010, that was great. It is a great arena. No, it isn't. It's a great atmosphere. But the zeitgeist has completely passed them by, because there's nothing, like, you don't get Final Countdown. Okada's music doesn't mean anything anymore. Omega's not there. Ospreay's music still gets a good reaction. He's basically the only one who has any sort of crowd participation. Private Party tried to get their shots dance over. It didn't work. Judas has gone. Great timing, Derek. But when you look at WWE, you can yeet. You can scream along with Seth Rollins. You've got Cody Rhodes. You've got LA Knight. The crowd enjoys it. Good wrestling will never be enough on its own. And I completely agree with what you're saying, Brandon. The feeling is gone. It's become a show for wrestling diehards instead of a show for people who like wrestling.
GWF ESPN 1992 says they were the hot company and added so many elements of ROH, NXT, Black and Gold, TNA, and WWE castoffs that they became the cold companies they were emulating. So they started off with their own identity, and then too many. Honestly, bringing in Adam Cole with the Undisputed Era crew, a lot happened that summer of ROH, summer of Punk that went wrong. But part of it was, hey, here's more belts. Here's another brand. Here's a wrestling match with a feud that you are not paying attention to. We're going to punish you as an AEW viewer that you haven't been following ROH. And we're going to reward ROH people. And we're going to use Dynamite to try to guilt you into watching ROH so you don't feel lost. I don't know if that was a mindset, but it's kind of how it came across at times when ROH suddenly got injected into things because we're going to start promoting this completely other show and this other brand. Jeff Jarrett, I think there's a lot you can learn from watching Jeff Jarrett if you're a little too extreme on the indie high spot. I want a Dave Meltzer star rating scale of wrestling philosophy. There's a lot you can learn from some of the tricks of the trade and the efficiency of Jeff Jarrett. But tone-wise, optics-wise, it said, the dying days of WCW, the struggling days of TNA. Double J from the 90s is on AEW TV. They lost their identity. We're doing a longer form, big picture discussion on AEW. I want to get to another video caller, Chris, and wrap up with email too. But tonight's show is an example of it, and the whole Moxley discussion kind of got us started, and a lot of things are. You can tell they're trying to reboot things in a way that isn't just, there's that WCW changing the logo, Russo and Bischoff walking out. Oh, everything is different. There was that. We're going to reset everything. There was the Bill Watts episode that still blew my mind in 87 or whatever, where he just reset everything and all the belts changed hands on one syndicated show. That's not what we're happening. It's not an overnight thing, but there is a sense they're trying to change things. And Moxley, I think on and off camera, is trying to lead the way. So there is a sense of awareness that maybe something needs to be done. And maybe now that they have the TV deal, maybe we just have to give them literally 2 years to execute something step by step by step. Stack days, stack weeks, stack good episodes, stack good storylines, one after another. Maybe you can win them back. But as people are saying in the chat, Zach Barber, let's not pretend that WWE getting rid of creepy old sex pest out of power isn't a massive factor. GWF ESPN says Vince McMahon was a top heel in wrestling and Tony Khan was a babyface. The mission statement of AEW kind of stopped filling a gap when Vince left. Standard Deviation says, I wonder if we're underestimating the role of BTE, being the elite and forming a connection with the hardcore fan base. Anyway, that's probably enough on that topic. So, Chris, thanks. We'll get you on as a co-host one of these weeks soon. This is always fun. Get your perspective.
I just want to throw out, this was actually a really good episode of Dynamite. I enjoyed the whole show. I'm not saying that the show was bad. I'm worried about the attendance. That's all. Anyway, thanks. Yep. Thanks, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
Great to talk to you. Great points. And awesome. I'll be back soon. Thanks, guys.
Yep. Check out his work at PWTorch.com, covering New Japan primarily. All right, Creighton Rabs is an audio caller with us. Creighton, thanks for holding. What's in your mind about Dynamite tonight?
I will tell you, this was probably one of the better Dynamites in a while. I mean, the tag team match was just absolutely intense. I liked the main event. I liked how they presented Sheldon and Lashley and MVP and the Hurt Business or Hurt Syndicate stable post-match made them, hey, we may have lost the battle, but we're going to win the war. I'm really optimistic about where that's going to go with Swerve. And I thought the Adam Cole angle, it was a good match, not as good as the tag team match, but it was really, I think Adam Cole did a good job selling that ankle injury. Mm-hmm. They were saying, "Oh, you got to stop," and no, he didn't. So that was very compelling. it's not to say there weren't some downsides. Maybe it was just me, but it's like when Mercedes Moné came out to the ring, it was dead. Or maybe I'm just imagining
it. Brandon, chime in on anything that Creighton brought up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you heard a lot of muted crowd reactions in general, and it speaks to the larger point that the conversation we were having with Chris about the crowd's just not coming up for a lot of these big stars, and it sort of drags the feel of the show down as a whole. Mercedes, though, I think is a particular case in that she's just really struggled to get consistently over with these crowds. I just don't think that her work week to week has given people much to sink their teeth into. Her in-ring work is generally quite good, but she isn't wrestling a whole lot right now. Camille as a character has not really taken off. I also don't think that it helps Mercedes' case right now that she's facing a really cold Chris Statlander who never turned. I mean, Statlander was once a very over babyface, was, for a time, a relatively over heel that seemed to be settling into that role pretty nicely. And then all of a sudden she's a babyface again. And I just think that sort of stymied her momentum and is sort of cutting off any interest that might be developing in this program off at the feet.
The other thing I picked up on with the Young Bucks basically getting out of town saying, "Oh, we're going to work from home." I'm wondering if that's if they're going to be taking some time off from TV, because it sounds like maybe that was a way to kind of write them off, or write them off TV. I meant to say. It
feels more like, I've been, as we've been talking and watching Dynamite, I'm like, what is up with the Bucks? Because they showed good sportsmanship, they drew attention to it. Then they did comedy where they're packing their bags frantically. They leave their friend behind. But then things get serious with Moxley and his crew taking out Cutler. And so them saying we're going to work from home, to me, Creighton, feels more like that was their intent, and that we lost the belts. They're almost okay with it in the sense of, hey, these guys earned it. We'll go home. We'll do our EVP stuff. We're okay not even getting a rematch. We're just going to work from home for a while. So they're just saying things are too crazy. Then we have to believe they would forget their best friend Cutler. If we can get past that, sort of like, why are there two tables with a tablecloth over it outside a trailer truck for, Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed to crash through? There's some license you just have to allot for, or you're going to go completely crazy, and each their own where they draw that line. But now the idea is the Bucks were going to go home, Brandon, but now they're not. It's crossing a line when you attack Brandon. And so now they were willing to step away, and now they're not. This lit a fire under them. They were tag champs who didn't defend the belts. They lost them. They seemed okay with it. Now we're going to go home. Brandon gets a hammer to the hand, lights a fire under them. It's a spark. Now they're reinvigorated, and they're ready to step up and join Orange Cassidy and eventually Kenny Omega and whomever to battle these guys. Is that a fair read of what you think the story they're trying to tell, regardless if you think it's the right story or well told?
I think it could be, but I do think that it would be a little it would be unfortunate if that's the direction they're going to go right out of the gate, because I do think that there's a story that really needs to be told with Kenny Omega in order to get them back on friendly terms. I mean, that, the crux of the Bucks heel turn and the major angle that they played out with them, finding their EVP powers, so to speak, and really leaning into that, was all based around sending Kenny Omega home, more or less. So they've got to reconcile that one way or another. So I don't necessarily discount that is exactly what is going to happen, what you laid out, Wade. But I also think that there could be a possibility that they do stay home for a bit, that we don't see them for a little while, and that, it is Kenny Omega who sort of, either brings them back into the fold reluctantly, or they come to handle their business with Kenny Omega first and somehow get embroiled in the conflict with Moxley and company. But they've got to address the Omega situation somehow without it just being like hunky-dory the moment that he shows up. You're muted.
The Chris Statlander turn, or lack thereof, shows they're willing to just go, this is where we're starting now. We're not, don't even bother thinking about that stuff.
Creighton and Adam Cole and MJF and all.
They're trying, but you need, a lot of us just blocked out what happened. Like, I mean, once it just, jumped the shark, so to speak, it's like, I didn't feel like it was my goal in life to really meticulously remember everything that happened. And I think a lot of people are that way. So maybe they're going to loosely acknowledge what happened, but try to steer us into a direction of this is what counts. And what did you think of Adam Cole's promo, Brandon, in trying to frame it as, you should have known you weren't going to be a trustworthy friend, and that was rude to say you would be. I don't know. I mean, go ahead.
I gave them credit when MJF returned back in, what was it? Was it May or so, Double or Nothing? And Adam Cole came back the same night, and they did what felt like a blow-off. MJF just takes care of Cole, he kicks him out of the ring, and we move on. And it felt like a really symbolic moment of saying, like, hey, we know we screwed up. This didn't work. We're moving on. Forget it happened. And I was fine with giving them that mulligan. Like, go ahead. And then the moment Adam Cole comes back, it's like, oh no, we're actually going to go back and revisit this.
Yeah.
So I would have preferred that it was left the way that they had it at the pay-per-view in the spring. But they're doing their due diligence. I mean, I respect the attempt at bringing this all back together. Do I think that it's wise to continuously draw attention to what I think most AEW fans view as the darkest period in the company's history? No. But I think that Cole is doing a decent enough job getting what he can out of it right now.
Yeah.
I think since you brought up MJF, I mean, the fact that he's basically pulling a John Cena, going off to film a movie, come back to Dynamite for a few weeks, film another movie. I mean, it's really hard how do you, I don't know how you reconcile that, to be honest. I mean, at some point, fans are probably going to be like, I could sense fans pretty much tuning him out in the long run.
So King of Strong Style jumps in on a similar topic. Wade, you've been in the business so long, maybe do you think it's wise for Tony to have so many people on limited dates when they only have one big show a week? So many people miss big TVs. I don't get it. This goes into the conversation, Brandon, that we're having with Chris, which is when you buy a ticket for AEW, 2 months out, 1 month out, 3 months out, whatever it is, you do not know who you're getting. And this would be a big deal for AEW to do, but it's kind of like the bench shortens in the NBA and the playoffs. Maybe it's 10 deep, 10 players get regular minutes, maybe only 9. Some teams, almost all the minutes go to 8 players, but in the playoffs, it's like you ride your starters, because the other team is, and it's the end of the season, you go all out. And so you got, maybe 6 people playing big minutes, and then, number 7 and 8 are playing a few. Does AEW shorten their bench, so to speak? Do you go, MJF, if we're going to be in the MJF business, we need you here, 6 out of 7 weeks. We need people to know they're going to see you. Cody Rhodes on Monday night worked a dark match after Raw. He wasn't on Raw, worked a dark match. If you go to a WWE show and you have, this goes to when AEW is drawing well. How many times did they draw well and people showed up and they didn't know if they're going to get Punk or Moxley? They didn't know if they're going to get the Bucks or if they were going to get Orange Cassidy when he was, over. You don't know who you're going to get. So you're buying tickets for a brand knowing and experiencing, in some cases, as a past ticket buyer, a lot of your top stars you're not going to see. The roster split for WWE lets you know when you buy a SmackDown ticket, here's who you're getting, and here's in all likelihood who you're not. Cody Rhodes, as Vince McMahon called Bret Hart, he's a super trooper. He's showing up, for during, especially the Build a Crown Jewel, or WrestleMania. He's showing up everywhere. This is what he wants to do. He wanted to be a top star. He is relishing this and soaking it up and saying there's time, like with Danielson, to be a dad when my kids are older and lighten up my schedule, but I'm going to do this. AEW needs more of those people right now. and Moxley appears to be one of them right now. He's back. They need guys who can stay healthy, which, by the way, means stop going for 7 freaking stars and be more careful. Make the moves you do count. Take fewer crazy bumps. Spend less time on social media defending, almost breaking your neck, saying we know what you're doing. We know what we're doing. And meanwhile, you're off TV for months at a time. Like, grow up. We need you every week. Stop doing things that are going to shorten your career or knock you out of action. And especially when you get older, and it's just common sense, you need to dial it down and be a smarter worker instead of an all-out worker. So that lecture over, but it's a reality, and we're seeing the price a lot of wrestlers are paying. Should Tony Khan, Brandon shorten the bench and go, here are the 12 main guys, the 8 main male wrestlers, the 4 main female wrestlers who are getting the majority of, to extend the NBA analogy, the majority of the minutes. We have our starters, we have a couple of bench players. Every week's going to be about them, and when you buy a ticket, you're going to get to see them in person do their thing. Do you do that, or is there a downside to that? And with 2 shows that they're making a lot of money on for TV rights fees, is to complicate the question, is a roster split in order so at least people know who they're buying a ticket to see?
I think having a clear picture of who you're going to see is very important. I mean, WWE, look at their house show business. Granted, it's much smaller than it used to be, but they would give you a list. They might not tell you the matches, but they would give you a list of the guys and girls who were going to be there, who were going to be wrestling on that show. And hey, you know what? If they didn't show up, they'd offer refunds, or they would fly out a equivalent or bigger star to make up for the fact that they broke their promise. And they've gotten away from that in some respects over time. I mean, we used to have full conversations about all of the false advertising WWE would do for their weekly TV.
Yep.
But I saw this firsthand with AEW. I went to 3 separate AEW shows during the time in which CM Punk was under contract with the company. At all 3 of those shows, CM Punk was healthy and available. He was advertised on 2 of the 3 shows. I did not see him once.
Wow.
So
that's an under the radar reason for attendance being down, by the way. And under the radar reason.
Absolutely. And I enjoyed all those shows. Don't get me wrong. I got plenty of enjoyment out of them. But are there people there who probably, went to see CM Punk? Absolutely. I mean, I saw at some of those shows more CM Punk shirts than any other shirt in the crowd. They were selling a CM Punk shirt at the merch stand. And if you've been to an AEW event, you know that there is not much merch available. So for them to have had a CM Punk shirt and him not to have been there made it all the more egregious, because people are buying the shirt for this guy that isn't going to show up. But I think that it would be very beneficial to have a very clear idea of who you're going to see. And I don't necessarily think that it needs to be set in stone, concrete every single week, but there needs to be 2 to 3 of your top guys on each show making an appearance. And I thought that they were doing a better job at that earlier in the year, particularly with Will Ospreay, who felt like he was becoming the face of the company. And he has taken a major step back in the last couple of months. And not in terms of, crowd dedication. He's still the most over guy on the show when he comes out, but he hasn't been there nearly as much. And he hasn't been involved in major main event storylines the way that he was when he first came in. And that could be an issue too. I mean, Wade, we talked in the spring about, they need to just be in the Will Ospreay business for a while.
Yep. And it seems like they have more access to Okada than Ospreay, so maybe they should be in the Okada business and recalibrate that pretty quickly too. You want to, like you said, to have 3, 4, 5 people who you're going to see all but one of them every week at Dynamite, and it's just established, and they're the ones getting the biggest push. It's tough. I know they're have storyline reasons they're writing people out. MJF, him being in movies and stuff. I mean, it's sort of good for AEW, but sort of not, because he's to some people he is the reason they'd be buying tickets, and you don't want to see him 10 seconds on a big screen and think that counts. So that's definitely an issue. Ramen Noodle pointed out, and then I'll throw back to you, Creighton. The ability to have your own life outside of the company is such a big part of the AEW sales pitch. I don't know if Tony can reel that back at this point, unfortunately, for the fans. Yeah, so go ahead, Creighton.
The last point I wanted to make was just what you brought up about an AEW brand split. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think that was the concept. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't that the concept behind Collision when they launched that program? Have certain members of the AEW roster on Collision and half on Dynamite, or am I just misremembering?
A soft split.
Yeah, it was a soft split, and Tony, he's talked about that recently. He'd even consider a fuller soft split with Collision, but I've never gotten the impression that Tony, I can't rule it out, but I haven't gotten the impression Tony gave as much thought to it as he should. I think it was supposed to be CM Punk and FTR's brand, and basically they'd get to request which wrestlers would show up at their TV. They'd have a different vibe to the show. They'd get to put their own stamp on it. Tony was still the main booker of both shows, but the people he surrounded himself with would give a different vibe to the shows. And it was just a way to keep them apart. And then Jack Perry, immaturely triggered Punk, who immaturely allowed himself to be triggered, and everything fell apart again. And it sucked for a lot of people. So yeah, Collision, I don't think was originally only going to happen if they did a roster split, but it turned out to be a happy option because you had somewhere for Punk to go and be a draw. And King of Strong Style says, AEW star power is so low, Tony needs to man up and let these guys know we need you on TV, no matter on TV, no reason to be coasting. But Ospreay, gonna want some time off and not flying every week. And I don't know. It's tough. Paul Levesque took some heat when he said, implied Ospreay didn't want to be, a workhorse, entering a company that's red hot, and this can be a great situation. Okada too, there was implications. AEW is getting people whose heart isn't in it, or it's just simply inconvenient for them to have a grinding schedule of a top person, but they're paying a price for it. And tickets, do you want to buy a ticket to ultimately see a main event that includes Shelton Benjamin and Private Party? I bet a lot of people who bought tickets to this show were not expecting the top two matches to feature one half of each of those matches to be Private Party and Shelton Benjamin. Shelton's gotten a nice run here for a few weeks, but that's not why people buy tickets to AEWs, to see them in main events. Yes, Moxley made an appearance. Yes, Orange Cassidy cut a promo, but Hangman Page is cutting a backstage promo. MJF appears briefly on the big screen. It's just, yeah. You're there to see a TV taping, and whoever shows up. But it's I think it's an underrated, under the radar reason for ticket sales drops too. Creighton, anything else you want to mention before we go?
Nope, that's all. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll probably see you Friday.
Excellent. Thanks, Creighton. All right, let's zip through JB's email, which will help us cover any topics we haven't, and then we'll wrap up here. JB says, I really liked Orange Cassidy leading off the show by cutting off Moxley's crew with their weekly cold open and delivering a heartfelt promo on why he needs to take leadership the rest of the AEW take leadership for the rest of the AEW Young locker room. I personally think he's living up to being a big enough babyface for the role of opposing Moxley. I mentioned it earlier. I don't think you did, Brandon. How'd you feel about Cassidy's promo and him at this stage of the Moxley story being the main opposition?
I liked it. I have always been if you kind of look at Darby Allin and Orange Cassidy as two guys who have come up in similar ways as pillars, or Cassidy isn't officially a pillar, is he? But kind of fits in with
he does fit in more than Sammy Guevara does at this point.
Right. So coming up in similar spots and having benefited or sometimes been held back by start-stop pushes, been at different levels on the card, held undercard titles. Their career paths have really followed the same trajectory. I've always seen, just a little bit more in Orange Cassidy. I think he fits, what I look for just a little bit more than Darby does. And I think, knowing now that there was a discussion about Darby being the one to unseat Bryan Danielson originally, I'm not surprised that they're continuing with that pivot, going down the avenue of Cassidy for now. And I like the fact that there has been some continuation in Cassidy's slow turn, not turning into a heel, but turning into a more serious figure. I mean, we've seen him go from the white t-shirts to the black t-shirts. It's been very subtle. The darker jeans, the darker jean jacket. He's just shed some of that comedic aspect to the character over time. And I think that it lends itself well to him now being the one to challenge this group when they are, accusing him of whatever they're, whether it be that he's not serious enough or is complacent, whatever. I like him in that role. Does it feel like a strong pay-per-view main event? No. I don't think that it reaches that level, and I do wonder if they they were able to get away with something like a Bryan Danielson versus Jack Perry at All Out, because they had the cage match with Swerve and Hangman to hang their hat on. But it doesn't feel like they have a grudge match that can slot into that spot this time around. And so it feels like Moxley and Cassidy may have to headline that show. And that doesn't feel like a AEW pay-per-view main event to me. And so I do wonder how they add some heat to that, because otherwise you're not going to be looking at a super strong card, especially coming off of Wrestle Dream, which I thought was another relatively weak card.
And what you're saying adds up to is an under the radar concern for AEW, the pay-per-view attendance. And if now we start getting B-level main events and, watered down lineups, I mean, I don't know, both buy rate and ticket sales wise, it could be a problem.
And it's one thing for Wrestle Dream to have something like that, but Full Gear is supposed to be one of your major events.
Yeah, one of the original 4 or 5. Yeah. Number 2 from JB. What I didn't like about Orange Cassidy's promo was going back to the well of needing AEW versus not needing AEW. It's become far too much of a crutch ever since the Bucks turned into heel EVPs. Yeah, I mean, that's been brought up before. Just the wrestlers saying, the wrestlers talking about, I'm here for AEW, we're a cause. It's a whole ECW thing. TNA tried to do that and it was clumsy. But yeah, that pro wrestling is a cause and we're in it together, as opposed to just every man for himself. And there's a time to talk about the locker room getting together, and maybe this Moxley angle is one of them. But man, you get a lot of that, and a lot of this women wrestlers often are telling the story of I was toiling on the indie scene and now look at me. And male, I mean, it's not just the male wrestlers are doing it. There's just too much of that. I'm so happy to be here and we need to appreciate things. It's just focus on presenting yourself as a star who is destined to be a star, instead of grateful that AEW is keeping you off the streets or out of having to sleep on a floor. Carry yourself like a star who is destined to be a star, not someone who AEW saved you from a life of destitute. I'm very intrigued with Adam Cole and Malachi Black. It takes me back to the personal favorite wrestling of my lifetime in my prime, Black and Gold NXT. My only question is, how are they going to fit that in the feud in the first two to three with Roderick Strong, all presumably before MJF at Full Gear? Is it possible Cole and Black waits until after Full Gear, and tonight was just a teaser? I'm intrigued if they can get Malachi Black to do business, and actually put over Orange Cassidy. It would mean something, because Malachi, I mean, you hate to reward someone who doesn't want to do business and is getting paid but not doing what you should do if you're not a mark for yourself, and you're a team player, and do jobs when it's strategically acceptable, or I should say not, there's times when you want to stand up for yourself if you think politics are trying to sabotage you, but that's not what's going on with Malachi and his time in AEW. So do you think Cole beats him and that builds up Cole? I think it would be a good win for him, and it would be a good gesture for Malachi.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that Cole would go over. I would suspect that would be the case. I mean, it makes sense. They're telling the story with MJF. I can't imagine cutting it off, especially being the second match in the series of 3 that he has to have. I mean, I might have a little bit more hesitation if Malachi was the final chapter, but with him being number 2, I think that Cole just wins. the match is intriguing to me. I'm a big fan of both guys in the ring. I think they can have a really really great match, and obviously they did in NXT. So I would expect the same here.
I'm think there's I think there's a greater likelihood of a real heavy shenanigan finish, a count-out win for Cole, or a DQ win for Cole, or a double pin. Was his shoulder really up? Or he doesn't kick out. He kicks out at 3, but his shoulder's still down, and it's disputed. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe Malachi Black doing the right thing and doing an actual job at a good time for someone who needs it going into a pay-per-view. I'll believe it when I see it. I'm bracing myself for something otherwise. Even if Orange Cassidy's arm is raised in the end, it doesn't mean he got a meaningful win, unfortunately. I like the overlap of the Mox crew, OC, and Darby crew brawling with the Bucks entrance tonight. I think it foreshadows the idea the Bucks may be in the journey of a face turn to defend the face faction of AEW from the savagery of Mox's crew. I think the Bucks' classy reaction to their tag title loss strengthens this theory even more. Want to throw in Lady B's super chat. Thank you, Lady B. Thanks to everybody for super chats. Lady B says, prediction, what's next for the Bucks, especially with Omega slowly making his return, including at a New Japan show next week, which Chris Lansdell brought up. And there's one other comment on the Bucks that I can't find. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think we talked quite a bit about what's next for the Bucks. I think JB is correct that the weaving of the Bucks, kind of the overlapping of what's going on with Moxley is intentional. And I think it's smart. It's good formatting and booking to sort of have them crossing paths with something, but even if they're not intimately involved in it yet.
Well, especially because I think the two factions in general are at odds. Like the idea of what the Elite currently represents in AEW and this rogue faction of Moxley are sort of at odds with each other. If they were to cross paths, I mean, the Bucks in their infinite power as heels should be able to just make it go away. I mean, we've seen them use their power to get themselves out of sticky situations before. And so, I mean, there's no reason to think that, you know, if they were attacked, or if this iteration of the BCC were suddenly interested in going after the Elite in some form or fashion, that they couldn't suspend. I mean, why wouldn't they suspend Moxley and company? I mean, they've done it with other wrestlers. They have that power as heels. So it makes sense that if they're going to cross paths at some point, that, you know, they shift closer to a babyface role where you don't have this AEW killer faction in John Moxley coupled with the Elite, whose purview is also supposedly to save AEW from itself, yada yada. They have very similar mission statements, even if they go about their business in different ways. So distancing the Bucks and the rest of the Elite from that, I think, is probably a wise booking decision overall.
JB says, I really enjoyed what I call a swerve that made sense with Private Parties who won over the Bucks. They had been teasing Private Parties breakup so hard that my antenna was personally up, but the crowd seemed to genuinely be pleasantly surprised. Dynamite has been lacking in meaningful title changes recently, so I was happy to say they went all in with one unnamed episode. And I like how Private Party was booked rather strongly the last 2 months leading to this victory. It actually shows a bit of a future booking plan from TK and gives flowers to an OG AEW tag team that now really freshens up the division. Yeah, fair comments. Number 7 on his list, I'm cautiously curious as to what Chris Jericho is going to do to take ROH to heights it's never seen before. Any idea on what the booking plan might be here? Brandon? Heel,
Nope.
Heel in the last stage of his career, talking big, trying to stay relevant. You know, I'm curious if Jericho, you know, steps up. You know, does he eventually stand up to Moxley and his crew? Is he eventually a victim? Everything right now points otherwise, other than him throwing a little comment
he is the very person that they should be attacking.
Yeah, really.
But he's a heel.
Was it Jericho or Big Bill who said, unlike what Moxley said? I think Bill was bragging up Jericho. Said, you know, Jericho's a guy who built this company. So I mean, they threw a little thing there, but that feels like it's more down the line, and maybe they want to take Jericho off of Dynamite for a while this all happens, so it can be a triumphant return when he comes back. I don't know, but you got Mark Briscoe saying you're bringing my brother into it again. It's not like they're pulling him away. I mean, so
And
yeah.
they're doing a fight without honor next week, and
Yep.
I continue to just have a real aversion to the mixing of ROH and AEW. I just think that they'd be so much better off being kept entirely separate. And I don't mind if Ring of Honor wrestlers are occasionally moving over to AEW for spots and stints when they need to exchange talent, but I just think muddying the water with the number of titles you already have in your under your primary company's umbrella, plus the titles that you bring in from New Japan and elsewhere, and then add in all the ROH titles. I mean, they've done a significantly better job over the course of the last year or so than they had previously. But I just would prefer to keep the split. Keep the split as solid as could be. I just don't think that there's much to gain at this point, and I think it hurts the credibility and reputation of the other titles.
Was the backstage segment with the Bucks shredding documents at all political, a reference and parody now that we're in election week in the U.S. with the current candidate who may have been accused of something similar during his prior tenure? The thought crossed my mind based off of Wade and Stephanie's conversation on the flagship on AEW, not really taking a political stand one way or the other during this election cycle. What do you know what the shredding documents was a bit? What was the bit? What's the joke there, Brandon?
You mean in the real world, or
just what or storyline? Why were they shredding documents?
Oh, I'm not sure. That was sort of the thing that clued me into the idea that maybe they might not be going, turning the Bucks babyface right away. That this might be more of a slow burn, because it seemed like they needed to cover up for something that they may have done before getting out of Dodge. So I wasn't sure where they necessarily were going with that. I didn't read into. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I hope it's not just a one-off thing. But I also didn't necessarily take it to be political in any way. I mean, yes, there is a history of candidates and former, presidents and other government officials shredding documents, but it can just be, it can be anything. It happens in the corporate world, in the business world. It doesn't necessarily have to be a political thing.
For all I know, it's a BTE callback to 2017 or something, and that would be a waste of TV time. When was the last time AEW had such a major storyline being interwoven throughout the show for such a prolonged period of time to this point? Even the evil heel EVP Bucks taking over. AEW storyline wasn't so intrinsically tied to most other storylines running throughout Dynamite. Yeah, I mean, that we have that. That's Moxley's telling a story that's weaved throughout. It can be good if it's a good story. Should the Private Party tag title win have closed the show? You can make a case for that. I mean, Lashley, obviously I wanted to have Lashley be the closing scene, but it would have been weird because you'd have to end with the Bucks, the angle with Cutler then. Yeah. It would be a backstage segment rather than an in-ring segment to close the show. 2 lights out on one night. Wade's going to need to double reset the lights out meter. Yeah, I'm not doing that. And is there any chance Private Party joins MVP Shelton and Lashley? And who joins Swerve and Nana to even the odds against MVP's crew? Any thoughts on that?
I think it's more likely that you see Private Party join Swerve and Nana than it would be that they join Lashley and Benjamin. I think that you want to. You've got a lot of heels and a lot of heel factions right now. You want to try to even that out. Private Party is just getting established as an act that has actually, gained some ground with the audience. I don't think that you want to cut that out from underneath them right now. And with the idea, as we talked about earlier, the possibility of Aussie Open coming back as strong challengers for Private Party for a babyface team, I just think Private Party is better suited as a babyface act right now. So I would prefer that they not be added to Benjamin and Lashley, at least unless it's something that they consider way down the road.
Yep. Brennan, anything else you want to bring up from the show we haven't covered? Anything else you have thoughts on?
I don't think so. We touched on Adam Cole and all of that. Touched on Camille and Mercedes Moné. So yeah, Jamie Hayter. That has been a pretty good example of someone just losing all momentum. Hayter came back to virtually no fanfare after being the most over woman in that division during her title run, And not to say that she should immediately be catapulted into a championship or anything like that. They've got something going with Mariah May, but it just has fallen completely flat. And maybe, hopefully, they get something going next week. But it just feels like it has taken a huge step back, and that's unfortunate.
Yep. All right, very good. Everybody go VIP if you want to support what we do and get a lot in return. You can go to pwtorch.com/govip for full details on VIP membership. You can also search PWTorch VIP in Spotify and subscribe via Patreon and get all our VIP shows and plus ad-free versions of our free shows like this one where the commercial breaks are skipped over. So a nice streamlined listening experience. That is you get a 7-day free trial too if you go through Spotify or directly through Patreon, patreon.com/PWTorchVIP, or just search PWTorch VIP in Spotify. It's a great way to support us, by the way, and get something in return. We definitely appreciate that, and we think you'll like the convenience and all the bonus content. But you can get our full VIP membership at pwtorch.com/govip and get access to a 35-plus year library of back issues of the Pro Wrestling Torch weekly newsletter, access that is compatible with Apple Podcasts and most other iOS and Android apps, with our VIP podcast feed, which with a full VIP membership you can customize with different specific show feeds, different groupings of shows, so you can have multiple feeds on your phone app, and it is compatible with Apple CarPlay and Apple Podcasts. There's no advanced settings. When you sign up, you get an email, you click on it, opens up Apple Podcasts, boom, you're in. So we've really got a slick system to make it as friction-free as possible. And you get full details at pwtorch.com/govip, including details on all the benefits that come with it. Brandon, thank you once again. Look forward to hearing from you after Crown Jewel on Saturday, I guess mid to late afternoon.
Yeah, and it's officially after midnight here, so happy Halloween for those of you on the East Coast.
I'm not there
for
yet.
You in about 18 minutes.
Exactly. Yep. Thanks everybody for joining us. Keep spreading the word about our show to others, and we'll talk to you next time, which for me will be on YouTube Friday after SmackDown. Thanks everybody.